Welcome to Chronic Curiosity, where we have real conversations with real people, from everything to anything, in attempts to facilitate dialogue with our fellow humans, and hopefully your curiosity as well as ours. If you can withstand the show, we ask, most importantly, that you tell your friends and family, but also you can pick up some merch or just donate to the show at chronic-curiosity.com in USD or Bitcoin. If you feel so obliged, you can give us a good rating and follow on whatever podcast platform you so choose. But please feel free to reach out to us on the website or the socials, which can also be found on the website, chronic-curiosity.com. And here we go.
On.
Great.
We can avoid that, which is awesome.
Yeah, it seems like you've been I just randomly, I don't even know why, but I did a quick, maybe it was to find the episodes that you've been on, to find a quick reference to where you know the episodes you were at, and then I searched you on Spotify, and it was just that list seems like it's gotten pretty big of the podcasts that you've been on.
I mean, yesterday I had 3 interviews. Just with these podcasts, so it's like luckily 2 of them there was like misfires. I'm getting to the point, man, where I'm not like keeping my notifications, like the notices and the time zones, because it's all over the world. I'm just like, oh, that was 9 a.m. I'm sorry, man. Like, my bad. It's just a bit much, but yeah, man, I'm doing all that. The cool stuff, I'm doing a lot of TikTok and Instagram. I'm putting little short things.
Right.
I don't know if you check that out. It's cool, and it's like it's bite-sized stuff, like because I can go on for a long time. So getting me to condense it, make it as clear as possible. Where's that?
Where I'm trying. I mean, I'll make sure to ask.
Dude, check it out.
We start recording, but like, where's that at? Like, yep. So I don't think you had an Instagram last time.
Yeah. So Jason Szeftel is the Instagram, and then I think I had like just a basic private one. And then I was like, oh, I should probably, this is where people, I'm not on Instagram like as a thing I do, but that's where everybody else is. So might as well do that. Yeah. So I'm going to have like an interviews, live streams, videos, all that kind of just little reels for that. But TikTok's actually where I'm having more fun. I just kind of take what I do on TikTok and I put it on Instagram. That's kind of basically what I'm doing. I'm just like,
there's a lot of that
doing that.
On.
Yeah, but it's cool, man. Like I was on a 2-week trip actually. I think it was actually, I think I texted you back or emailed you back right after I got back. So I was like, let's do it now. Because I just got back after the trip. I was like, let's go. I was like so ready to go. No, but I was like doing kind of like I was on the trip talking about different things in different areas and geography and why things matter. It was cool. It's kind of like an in the world, like my dorky version of vlogging, I guess you could say.
Right.
And no, it's fun. I'm going to do a lot more of that. Like I'm going surf. I went surfing yesterday and I was like, oh, I could talk about, this is really lame. It's like I can talk about the currents and the population centers, all this kind of stuff. Like I just didn't have my phone on me, but I'm going to be doing this stuff now like a lot. It's cool. It's like you learn something and it's short, and yeah, it's better than like sometimes me mouthing. I mean, you're into it, and like, but some people just have the attention spans of like people have like the attention spans of like gnats, man.
Yeah, it is. That's why I just posted a video the other day, and because Instagram is, for whatever reason, like Instagram, I enjoy the platform of it more than say like Twitter or I don't know, maybe well, I want to get into that too.
Yeah, but, we'll see.
Yeah. But like Facebook just doesn't flow well for me. Yeah,
I don't. So
like I like the Instagram thing, but I've been told like, hey, you know, you got to do Reels, which is basically like Instagram or TikTok. You know, it's like, man, like I just have such a hard time like doing the algorithm thing. You know, and really like, trying to push myself to like, you know, fit all those little puzzle pieces of the social media world. And it's like, I get it, but.
I definitely get it. Man, I avoided it. I still don't do a lot of it, but I was just on this trip, and I went on a trip in November, and all my friends were like, where are the pictures? We didn't get to see anything. And I was like, okay, but I hate like taking pictures of just myself somewhere. So I was like, all right, I'm going to just do a video where I talk about the stuff I already talk about in an environment that kind of showcases it. Right. And so I enjoy it. So they're all reels. So they're all like TikToks. I just put them as reels. So now I'm into it because it's like, it's not like targeted in any way, man. I haven't looked at, there's no algorithm tweaking there. Yeah. I'm just like saying the thing that comes to mind in the spot.
Well, I'll have to make sure to find you in there.
Yeah, I just did the first one where people are actually noticing. I was like, oh shit. It's like everyone's starting like, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know anything about China. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, all right, guys.
Yeah. Everybody's an expert, right?
Yeah, everybody's an expert. It's crazy now more than ever. Really, when the shit hits the fan, Russia invades. Everybody is an expert. Have you heard of the Dunning-Kruger Effect? I think you heard about that. It's one of those.
It sounds like I've heard it before, but I couldn't describe it.
Yeah, it's like one of those million like cognitive things. They talk about how we do all these things wrong all the time. This one's really funny. I thought it was really good. Someone was talking about it with the geopolitics. They're like, Dunning-Kruger basically means that the people who really know things, they're often like qualifying it, and they're like they say what they don't know, and they're like they don't like just mouth off. The people who don't know anything don't know what they don't know, and they talk all the time, and they like pretend like they know. So basically, like the people who really know things aren't saying it as much,
right.
And the people who don't know anything are often talking insanely, like with extreme confidence. You know what I mean? They're like versus the guys who know a lot. They're like, well, I'm not quite sure, and there's a range of probability. It's just funny. I'm just seeing a lot of that with the COVID. I mean, not the COVID.
That too.
That too. Yeah, with everything, right?
Everything. Yeah, that was that was epiphany I had. That was a handful of years back when I realized like how much I don't know, and it was like, oh, like I'm a complete idiot, and I just never knew it. Like, okay, like let's see where this takes me, right?
I mean, that's like the start of knowledge, man. I mean, I still remember when I was first trying to get a handle on basically China. I was like, I don't know anything. Like, I don't know anything about like anything. And just starting there, you learn, because people who don't want to accept maybe I don't know anything, they get really stuck not knowing anything.
Yeah, it can be a scary spot, right?
Yeah, it is.
It can be really scary. I don't know. We could just keep all of that in if you want to. I didn't like.
We can start whenever. Yeah, we can start whenever.
It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, let's just start now. Let's do it.
All right. Well,
or whatever you want. Like, seriously.
Okay. Really, I'll leave some of it in. Some of that was good.
Okay.
But this is your third time, Jason Szeftel.
Third time.
I appreciate you coming back on. I remember was it after the second time? Was it like 2 weeks later? I was like, son of a bitch. Like, we had you on like 2 weeks too early, because I think that was when the whole Evergrande Corporation thing was happening with China. And then since then, the wheels have just completely fallen off of the world. So I'm really excited. But I will say this, kind of capturing all of that. I feel like you do a really good job of making complex things, at least to the United States society and people that are, if they're curious, you kind of break them down to, at least helps me understand, at least personally helps me understand the complexity of it. It makes me realize that I have no idea what I don't know. But it helps kind of filter through some of those things. So anybody that hasn't listened to episode 46 and 52 with you, I would suggest starting from the beginning and going through all that, because it will help you understand, I guess, the basis of some of the things I'm sure we'll get into. So I'm really excited. But we've talked about China, some of its history, particularly tied in with geopolitics, all those things. And you mentioned, when we first got on, about deglobalization that you mentioned. And that was the first time, honestly, like, because I'm just, the last 2 years, like I said, I've realized I'm like, oh, I don't know anything. And at, my early mid 30s, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's all these things that like, I just don't know about. And there's just so much history and depth and interconnectivity throughout the world that just is mind blowing. But the second episode we did was called deglobalization, because you really hit on that. And, I remember you talking about that and thinking like, oh, what, like trying to comprehend everything that you were saying. And then months later, it just starts happening. But I guess, you for sure called it, and it's happening. I guess, how much did you expect maybe the acceleration of the degradation that we've seen since we've had that conversation, like, it seems like you were like, oh, thinking like I received this, like, oh, in the next couple of years, we're going to see this thing kind of start to happen. And now it's just like, boom. Like, and I'm starting to see like headlines of main outlets saying like, you deglobalization. What does this mean? I'm like, well, they should talk to Jason, because I talked to him a while ago and he knows what's going on. So like, did you like really expect it to be, obviously the whole Ukraine and Russia thing, I'm sure we can talk about, which threw a giant wrench in everything, but did you really expect it to happen like this quickly? Is this kind of what you foresaw, or was it like maybe not quite as quick?
I mean, to be honest, it was something where I thought it would happen quicker than I was saying. But if I really got into the speed, it would be really bleak and depressing, right? It's something like you can give people a bit of forewarning, but if you just start saying, dude, it's all over, things about to start crashing, it's just too much. And people often just kind of push it away if you say how bad things get. But the way it does work is that once it starts, it accelerates, because these things feed on each other. And that's kind of the way it happened. I mean, and the way it worked is basically we were all waiting for basically where is the shoe going to fall, right? And there's three main places. It was either going to be, Western Europe, somewhere between Germany and Russia, or the Middle East, or is it going to be East Asia? I mean, these are the places where you've had big major conflicts for the last 150 years. These are the major areas all around Eurasia where this can happen. Energy in the Middle East. It'd be all sorts of things in East Asia, and then the classic rodeo we see in Eastern Europe, again and again happening. Right. And this was it. And I mean, based on the sort of Russia's invasion of Georgia and Crimea, I mean, that was probably the most likely one. But I mean, they didn't do it in 2015, they didn't do it in 2016, they didn't do it in 2017. So they had to do it sometime. I think a really great way to frame just.
So you think it was imminent, like this was going to happen?
100%. Yeah. So I guess we've only really talked about China particularly, and primarily the place I focused on is China. But to really understand sort of the modern world, Russia's been a huge player in the way things have happened. And also historically, Russia's been basically China's greatest enemy for most of the time, back when it was a bunch of horde tribes, like they hadn't kind of all unified, like all the way up until basically the 1800. That was like the big bad, was just like, oh God, what were the steppe tribes going to do? They're going to ruin us, blah, blah, blah. So the unification of Russia is really important. The challenge for Russia has always been, just as a country, it is very weak. It has really bad land, and it is extremely vulnerable. There's basically 9 regions in Russia, 9 bordering areas on the edge of Russia that it needs to secure to actually be a sort of stable state. And when it was the Soviet Union, it had control over all of these border zones. So that's like the Altai Gap, that's the Bessarabian Gap. There's like, if I had a map, I could kind of point out all these regions all around. There's a place in the Caspian Sea, there's near Crimea, there's near Warsaw in Poland, there's the Baltic states. There's all these places that you need to be if you're Russia, because you don't have any strategic depth, right? So the Napoleon just rolled on through all the way almost to Moscow, right? Hitler tried to do the exact same thing. It's an extremely weak and vulnerable country. It's a weird thing to say because it's so big, it looks so powerful. But that's kind of the way it worked. So they had to move. They did have to try and do this. So Putin's always seemed like everyone's trying to present him as like a really crazy guy. Like he's got a weird thyroid problem. He's got all these things. And, there's probably all sorts of truth to all that. But Russia is really kind of at the end of the line here. It needed to do something. It needs to basically secure itself as any sort of a functional state. So the United States, we've talked about this before. The United States is ridiculously secure. It's on the other side of the world. It's got Mexico and Canada and a bunch of oceans. We don't think this way. But Russia's been invaded, over 50 times, and it has been invaded by a major state every time of the last century. And that's really stuck with them. And World War II, Hitler, all of that, that's the Great Patriotic War. That's the major sacrifice to stabilize and control Russia. All that is a huge part of Russian psychology. And they need to do this. And then there's 2 parts to it, right? There's this geographic part where if you want to you're basically Russia, you're poor, you don't have great rivers, you don't have natural economically dynamic zones, you don't have a lot of cultural integration, you have a lot of ethnic minorities all around the place that haven't been integrated. And then to actually, expand out, you have to be an empire. You have to expand out to control all these gaps I'm talking about. But those gaps, they're in other countries, right? They're in other countries that are now not part of the Soviet Union now, Russia, And the population of all of those countries around Russia that it needs to control to try and stabilize itself the way I'm talking about, it's larger than the population of Russia. So this whole thing was a fool's gambit, but they're kind of stuck. And the reason they're stuck is because they have to move now. So you have geography that says you're insecure, you could be invaded and crushed, you could snip a couple railroad lines and road lines in the middle of Siberia, cut Russia in half. They wouldn't be able to secure the other part of it. You could do similar things with pipelines. All this stuff is huge vulnerabilities everywhere. The problem is that it's demography, right? So you have the geography that says you need to be bigger. You have demography saying you need to be bigger now because Russia is running out of people. This is part of the story I don't think we've talked about before, that the entire world is aging. And this is one of the this is probably the biggest change in the structure of the global economy in the last 100 years is what's happening this decade. And Russia has one of the worst demography. Russia and China are basically competing to see who has the worst demography in the world.
So before you get into that real quick, I kind of wanted to break that down. And you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but it's we've like you said, you mentioned before, where we have this insulated view of the entire world, in the U.S. For plenty of reasons and about plenty of things. But one thing that I gleaned from you before was that like people think of China as this, this big giant of a power. But they have a bunch of people, they have a bunch of land. They are, a world power, but also with that, the land that they, inhabit isn't the greatest to try to sustain all of these people. A lot of the land is just not useful at all whatsoever.
Definitely.
So then, and like you talked about the countries all around them. So like we forget that like all we have is Canada, Mexico, and 2 giant oceans. So strategically, or at least militarily, I don't know if that's a word, it's pretty safe. But then we also have this, vast country that has all of these fantastic, properties as far as waterways and soil conditions. And, we're right in this perfect zone for all this agriculture and all these things that, China doesn't have. And if China doesn't have them, like Russia for sure doesn't, because it's even further north. Like, I don't know what those, like, so, and Russia's even bigger, and like, so they have more area to try to protect. And so it's interesting when we forget about, that view. And not only that, but like all of the countries to, the west and south of China and Russia, like they hold all these different types of people, all these different cultures and, languages and countries, and everyone's, the fascinating thing is like everyone's been fighting over there for land and food and power forever, basically. So
100%.
Like, I think it's a good thing to kind of keep in mind for anybody that hasn't really like thought about those things, that there's a lot going on over there that we can't necessarily connect with, I guess. So you say that you think the age of the population, because I've heard, people talk about, the like growth rates, the birth rates and all these things are slowing, and how this is a concern for different places. And so you're saying that that's like a huge piece of this puzzle?
Yeah, it's a big piece of the puzzle, but I want to just connect a bit with what you were saying, connecting Russia to China there, because that's really big, and you really nailed it. So I probably said in the last episode that there's not one China, there's many Chinas. And when China breaks up, it coughs up a bunch of other places. Well, look what happened to the Soviet Union. It coughed up Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, right? All these stands. Russia has a few more stands. It's gonna cough up eventually when things finally play out. And so that's really important, because you nailed it. Right? I mean, China has, I was comparing it to the United States. It's very, bad land, all these problems. We've talked about that. Russia's far worse, far worse than China.
Yeah, it seems like they're always wearing like hats and giant, like is there any nice weather?
It's really bad. Their best land is marginal at best, right? And it's vulnerable. I think a great way to think about how places like China and Russia think about back when the United States was still a frontier country, and you had, fierce Indian tribe, like Native American tribes. Imagine them as actually being fierce and not like having weapons, and they're intimidating. And you were still trying to take land and deal with other people. Places like Russia and China are still in that mode. They're not just like, oh, we solved that 120 years ago. That's the United States position. Oh yeah, like we had like wars like that in the 19th century. Right. It's very different. Russia is this Russian Federation brand new, formed in the 1990s. And it was brutal. It went through a brutal ethnic war trying to pacify Chechnya twice in the 1990s. Its campaigns looked exactly like what we're seeing now. It was like firebomb the cities, have mass casualties, have as many refugees as possible, stuff them into Europe, lower the entire population of the country by destroying the infrastructure. And anybody who remains, you just assume that they are enemy combatants and you kill them. Right, that's more the Russian way of war. The Air Force is a flying artillery. The artillery is really mean and a huge part of the military, and that's the doctrine, right? It's a mass. I mean, this is a country. So let's now get to what you're talking about. What I mentioned is demography, right? You got geography and you got demography. Demography is huge. So the three things to keep in mind about populations are basically the population density, the population density. And then basically the population structure, right? So obviously you have the number of people, but it's really like how many people. It's not just like how many people does a country have. It is where are those people located, and then how many old people do you have? How many young people do you have? Are you growing? Are you shrinking? All that kind of stuff. That's the really key stuff. And yeah, everyone sees the headlines. Fertility is dropping. Nobody's having children. It's all done. And that's a really important thing, but if you just listen to the news, it's just kind of been talking about this for like 15 years. Like, all right, there's less and less children. Like, so what? So what? They never tell you. Like, there's these big articles. They're very doomsday, and then they're like, tell me what this means, but they never do it. So here's what it is. The basic way it works is that before industrialization, before we could control reproduction in biology, primarily through contraception, birth control, stuff like that, the human population had a basic structure. You had a lot of babies, bit less, youth, adults. Then you basically had not that many old people, more mature workers, even more youth and sort of mid-age people. And then you had even more babies, right? You had people who were just dying. It was a sort of natural thing where you had a lot of birth because people are having kids in their, teens and 20s. Right. And then
the animal kingdom, it's
just like,
the game of numbers. The more you have, the more they survive.
Yeah, exactly. And what happened is that industrialization really changed all this, and it really changed in the 20th century. Like in the 19th century, they were always talking about, oh my God, like a Dickens. I don't recommend. I've never actually read a Dickens book, but I don't recommend. It sounds terrible, but a lot of it is like just all these horrible urban squalor in the 19th century. Because what was happening is you had a huge growth of agriculture, and it was pumping out massive efficiencies. You didn't need as many people on the farm, so you're having more people. You didn't need as many in the fields, so they started flooding into cities. And the cities were not capable of handling them, and you got terrible diseases, terrible stuff, all that kind of. But you just had so many people. People literally thought we were gonna not be able to handle anything because there was just too many people. And you still hear that sometimes in the mid to late 20th century. There's all this fear of like a population bomb, and there's going to be too many people on Earth, and blah blah blah. There's a huge fear of that kind of stuff for a long time. But a major shift happened in the end of the 20th century. Every single major advanced country in the world stopped having children. And what happens is that now the whole population pyramid, which says like how many people you have of every age, right? How many old people do you have? How many young? They're all inverting. So we're all moving into a place where you have more old people, then you have mature workers, then you have youths, then you have babies. And so what you're actually doing is these are terminal demographies. These are countries where the actual population, let's say Russians, for example, they cannot reproduce themselves. There's now literally too few, in particular, wombs that are able to have children to even maintain your numbers. So you end up like Japan. And Japan is, by the way, the best case scenario. We've all talked about Japan as this crazy outlier. Like,
right.
They're handling it, and they're staying old and they're staying healthy and all this. Most countries are not. They're not going to get close to being what Japan had. And even though Japan's being seen to us as like a place that's just missed opportunities, lost decades, every country on Earth is basically heading off the cliff in terms of demography, except for the United States and maybe 4 or 5 others. And it's hard to deal with.
I don't. Maybe we can touch on this. I can let you keep going, but maybe we can come back to this. Is I guess another concern with that would be the health of the citizens in the United States. That we've seen that like the life expectancy and those things seem to like they've dropped for the last 2 years, and not surprisingly considering our health habits. here, but you can maybe continue. But that was just kind of a thought that was like, man, is this something that's coming for us too? Much quicker than we expect, and those implications.
Yeah, definitely. One reason I was far more supportive of the idea of COVID vaccines and all this stuff is because maintaining the health of your population in this, like, literally the human species dying out type situation. That's really what we're talking about. It is, actually Elon Musk has recently gotten into this thing. He's been saying all over the place, one of the greatest threats to civilization is like basically depopulation. We're basically going to die with a whimper. Yeah. And it's true. If you just take like how many babies you had this year and you multiply it by the average life expectancy.
Right.
So basically, you take, imagine you had the same number all the way, and that's a good option. The numbers are horrible. They're way worse than all the projections using fancy stuff and all these statistical agencies. So it's much worse than even we're really talking about. And a place like China, it's horrifically worse. And just briefly, I'll give the situation in Russia so I can tie it back to explain why Russia need to move now. This is really important for people to understand. I want to
touch on that is why now, why they had to.
Yeah, and I'll definitely talk about our population and our health habits and all this stuff because it's really important. And also, really, how do you the reason thing that makes the United States different? So, well, I'll just say briefly so population. So how does the population grow? Well, it grows through basically people living longer. So there's less people dying. There's the death rate. Then there's the birth rate, and there's also the net migration rate. How many people coming in? How many people coming out? That's a huge thing. So this is why in the 2020s, 2030s, the battles over immigration are going to stay, but they're going to shift because we're going to need a lot more workers, and it's going to be all sorts of workers. And we're actually one of the only countries, for various reasons, being an immigrant country, all this kind of stuff. We're very open to people all around the world. And that's actually a huge way where we can basically, another way to think about it is the United States is going to lap up and steal all of the best people and all of the talent and all of the workers from the rest of the world. So that's one thing that's probably going to happen, which is like, oh, good, another benefit for America. Meanwhile, chaos all around us. Right. But the important thing for Russia, it's been brutalized, man. The 20th century, right? We had World War I. We sent some people at the very end, like gave a big thumbs up to the British and the French, walked out. Basically, nobody died. Like, not, you know what I mean? It wasn't compared to the other places, right. Like horrific stuff. World War II, we came late. But the country that really suffered in both of these wars, besides Germany, was Russia. Russia lost millions and millions of people. It got giant scoops taken out of its demography, of its young people at that time. So World War I, then World War II. And then it had the delights of communism in the early years take out another chunk. Then you had the 1990s collapse, and you had people both leaving the country, and you had a collapse in the birth rate as well. So Russia has just been brutalized. Like, we don't think about this because we've been growing so naturally. We have so much immigration. People don't immigrate to Russia, right? You start knocking off millions of people. Russia's running, and the reason it needs to move quickly is Russia has all this land, and the security costs, the amount of people, it's running out of people to man its borders. That's what we're talking about here. Conscripts don't work anymore, and it can't maintain the sale. Here's another really important stat. Modern Russia has a military inherited from the Soviet Union, which was trying to, take out the United States, duke it out back in the day. It's trying to fund that military with a budget that's the size of Britain's, right? So it can't maintain, it could barely maintain any of its equipment, right? And just having soldiers is a huge problem. So basically what was going to happen in the 2020s now, quite literally now, it's like right now, Russia was going to run out of the people it would need to even conduct major military operations. And seriously, that's where we're at.
So that's the reason why they have to, in that thought process, is we have to do this now. It's now or never.
It's now or never.
Expand. So I guess too, is there anybody that would consider invading Russia for the land, or is it more so that they feel like that their, individual populations in certain pockets want to revolt and kind of break themselves off of Russia? Is that because I guess what's the concern of who wants, the tundras of the Siberian desert or whatever it is, you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, no, the big question, whenever I talk about this, people are always like, yeah, that sounds great until why would anyone want to invade Russia? Who wants it? Yeah, they have these gaps. Yeah. But who's going to invade Russia? It's a fair question. And the problem isn't, the truth is there's nobody like you look around, you're like, well, nobody's going to invade Russia, but that's not how the Russians think, right? Hitler invaded Russia. Napoleon invaded Russia. Swedes invaded Russia. Tsars invaded Russia. I mean, sorry, the sultans invaded Russia. It's really deeply embedded in their psychology. Another way to think about it is, here's a good example. The United States is always doing all these weapons tests. We're testing nuclear weapons all the time. We're doing all this stuff. And if you're sort of or an average sort of liberal person in particular in the United States, will be like, why are we doing all this all the time? Who are we threatening? Who's going to nuke us? What's going on? It's like, we're doing it because that's what the Russians in particular respond to. We do all this testing because they do this kind of testing, and they see us doing this testing and they nod thinking, okay, they're not messing around, right? This is how you have to engage with them. This is the language they understand. That's why we
just publicly flexing just to keep the other guy going, oh, okay. Basically.
Yeah. And they're very afraid that if they look weak, they'll just invite, again, both foreign people to come in, and it could be minor, right? It could be one of the stands. It could be Uzbekistan taking over all sorts of stuff over there. It could be like, there's a lot of countries all around. It could be Sweden just saying, anyway, this is all kind of farcical in our minds, but you're right. It's both things. They're worried that the mere, if they can't even appear strong, they feel like they're just going to be invaded. It's kind of deeply embedded in the psychology. Second one is, yes, if they don't feel like they can maintain their current borders, they do feel like all sorts of separatist movements within the country will gain ground. And again, it's not crazy. Look at Chechnya. Basically what happened, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Russian Federation was born in the 1990s. And then Chechnya blew up into a firestorm right when, they tried to break out, like all the other stands, right? They wanted to be a Chechnya stand. And they're like, no, you don't get to be. And there's good reasons. I mean, that's one of those main areas. That Caucasus region is a place that Russia needs to plug. It needs to plug these gaps. Otherwise, you could just have, again, and it could be all sorts of things. If you don't have control over these land borders, it doesn't have to be a military situation, but you could have Chinese, for example, you could have all sorts of Chinese. I don't want to say peasants, but you could have all sorts of Chinese workers that are moved into the area. Suddenly you have an imbalance of your own population to a foreign population. You could have all sorts of smuggling routes. You could have easy access for foreign intelligence agencies to start infiltrating and changing the perceptions, opinions of this group. They could all be trying to work against central authority. It opens your country up to being destabilized by other countries.
And I guess
and that's what they do. That's what they do.
Well, that's what everyone does, right? They got to secure their own stuff. I guess maybe I didn't think about too. It's especially for a land mass in an area that big. I guess it wouldn't take much to find the choke points of whether it be transportation or shipping and all these import export type things. If you own this choke point, then you don't have to control the entire chunk of the country. It's you own one little spot and you take a big chunk of the country with you because of that. I guess that's
it. Yeah, 100%. Again, it comes back down to geography. It looks so big, but you can point out 5 or 6 points where it's like, all right, someone pokes that, the whole thing crumbles. A great example is World War II. Hitler invaded Russia, and he got really ambitious. He tried to invade 3 areas at once, but all he had to do is basically just aim directly at this Baku, which is basically, it's part of Azerbaijan. It was the main oil fields that Russia used to basically have all of its oil for all of its vehicles and particularly its military. That was what the Battle of Stalingrad was about. It was basically, would Hitler be able to reach Baku and shut off the tap for all Russian military vehicles? If he had just put all of his forces to do that, he would have just knocked it out. Right? That was it. That would have been the end of the war. Instead, he was like, I want Moscow and I want St. Petersburg. I want everything all at once. And even a similar thing, 1991, Desert Storm. We look back at Desert Storm, we're like, wow, we really pounded that small Middle Eastern nation. But here's the thing: Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. That was huge, destabilized everything. But the real threat was, well, what if he did the same to Saudi Arabia? So if Saddam had basically just, instead of stopping in Kuwait, if he had just kept on gunning it all the way to the Saudi Arabian oil fields and just stopped there, that's it. That's checkmate. There's nothing else. We wouldn't be able to do anything. Nobody would be able to do anything. So the reason we suddenly massed insane force there, it was for that. And we also put a major carrier base there. We started stationing routine forces in the region in the 1990s, basically because we realized, oh my God, we are so vulnerable just because wasn't something based in North America. It wasn't there. It was a choke point in another part of the globe. So we freaked out. I mean, and that's part of the reason conservative part of the defense establishment was so keen on going in. Again, the idea that there's all these other choke points, all this kind of stuff, it's a real thing. And you look at the bigger a country is, the more powerful we assume it is. But most of the time, 99% of the time, it goes the other way. Really,
they don't have the supplies and people to.
It's a mess. Usually it's just a mess. Like deep down, it's a mess. Like you look deep down, you're like India is a good example. India and Brazil, these countries are absolute messes. And I don't mean in some sort of essential way like the Indians and the Brazilian people. I mean, no, like the political thing, the way they've tried to group these people together as one unit, it's a mess. And the ability to sustain that, and maintain the standard of living, improve it, all this kind of stuff, it's a mess. And Russia, of course, is a mess.
Right. I wonder how much of that is playing out now in real time in the United States, because you realize like it's a big country, and at first like everyone kind of has the same idea of, hey, we want to come here and start new, and it's the land of opportunity, all these things, but it's only been a couple 100 years. Eventually, maybe at some point, because I've heard some talk of some bigger people, bigger names talking about like how we may just need to break this place up because it's just such a giant chunk of land that eventually, once it's populated and people spread out and they kind of get into little tribal zones, that you just can't maintain the whole thing. Like how do you maintain something with all these people? And you mentioned India, and obviously we've talked about China, the population there, and the population of India, and those are big countries with a lot of people, but China's got a lot of land and Russia's got a lot of land with even less people. So I guess like you understand, like being spread out that far, I guess it makes sense how they could get destabilized, over time.
Yeah, I agree. It's really a thought that is coming out a lot, and it's all these op-eds, all this kind of stuff is being written about it. But after having studied a place like China deeply, and in particular the complexity of China, really helps you understand what a country is like when it really is a mess underneath. And most people just haven't. Honestly, the geographic knowledge is weak. And I think that's the best way to think about it, right? There's a lot of unifying features that actually make the relatively large population, actually the very large population of the United States, far more stable. I'm one of the people I actually believe there's much more long-term stability in the United States than the people are aware of. And I think once you compare it to other countries and you really see the way they function or don't function, it becomes more clear. Which is an example. I'm in Santa Monica right now, and it's probably one of the more liberal places on earth, but still you go if you go county by county during any presidential election, there's like 40% of the people actually voting Republican, right? It actually it looks super red, super blue, but in all it's actually really not. And again, this is a question of distribution, right? So how are people spread out, and what are the integrating features? So in the United States, you basically have the giant Mississippi River system. We probably talked about this. This integrates a lot of the land. Overlaid on top of that, you have road and rail systems. You have a distributed economic infrastructure where there's many parts of the United States that are functional economic units on their own, right? California does its thing. The Pacific Northwest does its thing. Texas does its thing. The Great Lakes, Chicago is doing its thing. They're not all dependent. So in Russia, you have like Moscow. Or in a lot of places, you have the main political center is the center of everything, often because that's where they redistribute all the taxes and stuff like that. The United States has a much more broad-based set of economic opportunities. And the real question is always, what's the state of the sort of the sense of nationalism and political integration and consolidation? And you go around the world, Americans are very a nationalist and proud and American in general. And we get into all of our fights, and we're very noisy, and it's all very rowdy and rambunctious. But this is totally different from what you see like in a Russia or a China. And that's definitely something we could talk about. But it's tougher because it's the best way to talk about this is just like to show it on a map, right? To kind of show things. It's so much easier when it's visual versus like if I were like whenever I always want to like close my eyes and like imagine it as I'm talking, but it's a bit weird.
Well, you could pull a map up and share it if you want to. I mean, that would be kind of cool. We could do that. But yeah, it's really interesting.
It might be kind of cool actually.
Put all those things through a different lens that we normally see them. Oh no, I'm stuck on my cord. So it's because you just realize how much is going on that we just never realize. But it's talking about the governmental centers makes me real weary about talking about turning DC into a state. Maybe that makes me even more concerned about that idea now that you mention it like that.
Yeah, an interesting thing is I've actually been far less concerned about American domestic. I'm actually I wouldn't say I'm ignoring American domestic politics right now, but I kind of am.
I feel like everybody is in a real sense, because no one is just like, whatever, it's a shit show. Like, we're just gonna keep doing it.
Like I think I might have said it before, but like the U.S. is going through a restructuring. The political parties and like the coalitions they're kind of reconfiguring themselves. Like I have a lot of friends who were strong Republicans before Trump, and now they refuse to call themselves Republicans. I have friends who had no affiliation at all. Now they're strong. It's all changed, and there's new coalitions are forming. So it's just a chaotic period. I'm not focusing on all the little individual changes, but it's it's a real thing. I actually forgot where I was going to go with that, but yeah, the basic thing with the United States is that domestic politics is a mess, but it's not like the country underneath is actually still functioning. Yeah, I guess people don't believe me when I say this kind of stuff, but
well, I think when you see it in like the normal person, especially maybe not the normal person. I guess it depends on what you define as normal. But like if you look on social media or any of these things where you can kind of see these things happening, or media outlets, whatever it is, like it always seems like everything's burning down, because that's sex sells. But like, so people see these things and they like, all they see is, for the most part, either everybody that agrees with me or everybody that doesn't. And then you realize, like, you go out and about and you talk to people and it's like, all right, we might just disagree, politically, but unless we bring it up, we would never know it. And I think people, at least myself, I know for me, I see things and I'm like, I think it's so much worse than it really is, until you realize it kind of comes down to the people that are most upset, or the people that are the most ridiculous, or whatever it is, they're always the loudest. So we hear them more. And it's like, you kind of forget to like, parse those things out and make sure you categorize them properly, that, hey, not everybody is feeling this way.
Yeah. And here's the second part I was going to say is like, while I'm sort of, I've been ignoring a lot of US politics. The other big reason is because it's stalled. Right. And a big reason I wasn't early on, I wasn't saying, it's all the shit is going to hit the fan next month. Get ready. I was kind of like, it's a year or two. We'll see. You don't want to be too big, but also U.S. politics in general is stalled, but history is moving again. So this is the key thing. A lot of these debates and stuff we've been having about all sorts of social issues, all this kind of stuff, this is all going away. We're going to have real issues all around the world and in the United States, and they're coming like right now within months.
Coming fast.
Definitely within a year. It's coming fast. And so we're going to have to change. We've already seen like unthinkable political changes have happened in a country like Germany. The Green Party, which is like, a lot you could say about that party, but in general, Germany's transforming, right? It's given up all this whole thing with Russia. It's trying to transform its whole industry. It's having to think about doing, coal, natural gas, all these energy things, all these things that its left was very concerned with. All of it is going out the window because times are changing. History is moving again, and real needs have appeared and real threats. And so that is what really kind of can jolt these stuck political systems out of whack. And we've all seen it. We only govern by crisis at this point. Like we've known that for a long time now.
That's good. So, I like that. It is.
And I was just waiting for this other stuff wasn't a real crisis. Actually, this time I felt like with everything going on, I'm actually going to pour myself a beer for this conversation.
I got my bourbon ready.
Oh, nice.
This is actually maybe not. It's not exactly from your parts, but it's a Woodinville. It's made in Washington, I believe.
In Washington, yeah, nice.
Not quite next door, but it's kind of close. A lot closer than me. So.
Yeah, I'm going to be up pretty nearby. I'm going to be up in Oregon probably in September or October. Do some camping out in Southern Oregon. That'll be good.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. What was I going to say? I was pouring the beer. I just got enthralled by the gold, by the cold drink.
But we were talking. Yeah, I mean, United States and the political system and how we're governing by crisis.
Yeah, governing by crisis, man. So I was just waiting for the real crisis. Like, deglobalization is the real crisis. This is the breakdown of the system the U.S. built over the last 75 years and after World War II, and then it tried to rejigger to include Russia, the new Russia, and China in the 1990s. And unfortunately, Russia is getting booted. Well, not unfortunately, I mean, it's showing that it's Russia. We can stop pretending countries are all just versions of each other and they're totally the same, and we don't want to stereotype anyone or anything. And then China's also going to get booted pretty soon too. And that is the way it's going to work. And that means the system we built the last 30 years, it's got to go. And that's going to be major dislocations and transformations of everything. And yeah, so that's when you stop talking about bathrooms, basically, is the way I'm going to put it.
Yeah, I get you. I think that's I thought about that earlier when you had mentioned something. I don't know exactly what it was, but like when we start, we've been needing I heard somebody say it one way. It was like basically like, hey, we need to go to war. I don't know. So I agree with that, but we needed a good crisis, and COVID was not a good crisis because that was just a shitstorm that I still don't know how all that thing happened and exactly how all that thing played out. But you realize it when, we think that, our government or our society or whatever it is, like we're so advanced and, we got everything under control now. We got, you talk about globalization. We're dealing with China and Russia and, all these, Saudi and everything's going great. We all have our differences but that's okay. We're all different and everything's going well. And then until something happens and it's like, it just completely falls apart and you realize that, maybe we never really knew what we were doing, but we were just getting by. Like we were lucky for a while that it just happened to work out. And it seems like that's becoming more apparent. And I don't know if it's the people in those positions or it's just human nature in itself, but we've seen things fall apart real quick.
Yeah, I mean, whole parts of the global system have been both running on autopilot, and we've just been doing it by the seat of our pants. And we've also just kind of been winging it for a lot of it, whether it's like monetary policy, all sorts of things. You think all the sophisticated people have just been like really doing it, going through all of the permutations. No, it's just been like, all right, this works in the moment. Let's not touch it because it looks a little unstable, but I don't want to really poke around because then we'll really find out. Yeah, that's not inaccurate for sure. And I think that the United States, it's going to be a real change. I mean, a lot of people's value systems are going to be totally transformed. People who believe that we're going to head into a great future with green energy, green, cheap, beautiful energy was going to renew the earth. That's going to be really tested. Mm-hmm. If you believed all sorts of things about the environment, how we'd come together to save ourselves from climate change and all this kind of stuff, none of this is going to pan out, unfortunately. So we're going to have to reconfigure like what we believe. And this is a real major sort of thing. It's really tough. The sort of scale of it is pretty crazy. And you kind of see it, like COVID really exposed how things are really bad for people. But you're right. I've heard a lot of people say that we need a war, right? We need something like a war. The idea being we need something to focus on, to like muster ourselves together and focus. And China's that thing right now. So the whole U.S. government is basically trying to transform itself to focus on China and to motivate itself to basically try and get the U.S. to up its game by having a competitor, having someone you could sort of like the U.S. performed better when it was competing with the Soviet Union. So maybe we'll do the same thing with China. Unfortunately, we're going to soon find out that China is house cards, and we're not going to be competing with it the way we think we were. And we're not going to be competing with Russia. So it's really funny. The military reports, Pentagon reports that come out, and they have all these reports about who the competitors are in the other countries and what we need to do to compete with them and fight them, beat them, all that kind of stuff. And they described China as a near peer threat. That's fair. They're building all sorts of stuff. And they also called Russia one as well, like Russia and China. And we're rapidly realizing that Russia can't do the most basic military functions. Right. I mean, I don't know if you've heard this. You've probably read about all this, like the sheer epic incompetence of what's been going down on their side. It seems
to be that way. You would think if they again, that was one thing, we can get into it if you have. I'm interested to hear your particular ideas about the whys and the whats, and like you said, why they have to do this now. Because that's an interesting aspect I never really thought of. That like it's not just hey, we want Ukraine or Crimea or whatever it is. It's this thing that's like, it's something else is behind it driving. Like,
Yes.
well, we got to do something because we
deeper
need,
forces, man. Deeper forces.
we need this additional, access to resources and the Black Sea or whatever it is. Like we need to expand this because we can't survive on what we have. But like, it just seems like, man, like if they were going to go full on out, which it kind of seems like they kind of are. I mean, they're just bombing everything and, not worried about, it seems like they're not worried about civilian casualties. Maybe there's a lot of news that you just never know exactly what the truth is, where that line is. But like, you would think that country that big that is supposed a superpower, like, well, if they don't care about, war crimes and, being decent people in war, if that's a thing.
They don't.
Yeah. Like, so like, why didn't they just wipe the whole country out and just take it? Like if that was their plan, like why weren't they able to do that? It seems kind of like, are they really that inept or they don't have the ability, they don't have the people, they don't have, all these things that you've mentioned.
It's all of the above, man. It's really it was a bad plan executed poorly with bad information and bad logistics. It's really quite epic, the scale of this. So just to break it down a bit, like he's basically, cult of personality, one man leadership. Nobody tells him what's really going on. The military always says, oh, it's great. We're building all sorts of rockets. It's amazing at the Oslov plant or whatever. Like,
because they're too afraid to tell him what's really going on.
Yeah. And so he gets a skewed view of the world. But the key failure here, probably on their part, was they bit off more than they could chew, right? They thought they were more powerful than they were. And really the power is like they are fighting a war like the U.S. fought probably in the early 1980s. That's how bad it is. Their command and control is terrible. Their coordination between the different armed services is really bad. Their doctrines are terrible. Their logistics is horrific. Like, we basically learned that if we got into a conflict with them, we would obliterate the Russian military. That's what the conclusion has been on the American side. They had a 40-mile long convoy of just tanks in a row.
Right.
The U.S. Air Force would lose. That's a turkey shoot. I mean, that's worse than what you saw in Iraq when they basically glassed whole roadways in 1991 during Desert Storm. I mean, it's pretty bad. And then obviously they had this giant 40-mile convoy. They didn't give it enough fuel, and they didn't give the soldiers enough food. Right. So it ran out of fuel, and then they ran out of the soldiers. Right. Yeah, it's all terrible. So, but getting back to what I was getting to, they bit off more than they could chew. Their plan was probably to just quickly push to Kiev, replace the leadership, put in a kind of puppet, secure their influence, gain some. They actually wanted Russian speakers, so they want to bolster their overall demographics and population by gaining the Russian speakers in the East. I mean, and the problem is they've basically messed up all of their the outcomes they want, right? So they didn't manage to get Kiev really quickly, and they also tried to attack from 3 fronts, and they basically didn't supply any of them or give them enough firepower or intelligence or anything to accomplish their goal. And then the resistance has been fierce. So really what they probably should have done is just go for the East first. Just take that. Like maybe he got too worried that now is the time he finally realized the scale of how bad things were and started to maybe push too hard. But they've performed so bad, man, so bad that they probably can't. Like, I actually did a video. I was saying, Russia's eventually going to, this might be long, but eventually Russia's going to take Ukraine because that was my assumption. I mean, the scale of how bad their military is doing and how weakened and just debilitated it is, really. Like, their officer corps, there's so many problems. I mean, you can go on Twitter and there's guys, like military guys, analyzing all this stuff. It's wild how bad they're doing. They probably can't even take all of Ukraine at this point.
Right.
And but I will say that the thing that people need to realize is that the Russian way of war is not like the American way of war, right? We have like really high quality weapons, and we use precision strikes, and we do very detailed, coordinated, calculated operations. And you're trying to minimize the loss of life on your side and on the other side in terms of non-combatants. That's not what the Russians do.
Right. So that's the question is the real concern is obviously there's concern for the Ukraine people And even honestly, the people of Russia that have nothing to do with this, they're like, why are you destroying our lives? We're just trying to like live over here.
Yeah.
But like the main concern now would be like, all right, what happens if they realize that they've lost, they've been backed into a corner, and they just and Putin just goes, yeah, okay, let's just start pressing the nuke buttons, like, because why not? I think it was at the one of Russia's top guys said something the other day that kind of alluded to, nuclear war is a serious threat. Like it just is. Like that's a possibility. It was like that's the, like, what could happen with that if he was just like, you know what? I lost. I had a good run at it. Let's push the buttons. Like,
yeah, definitely. There's a real threat of, I mean, I know this is kind of grim. There's a real threat of nuclear war. Ideally, I mean, not ideally. It does not seem to be this is more, we're entering a world where there's going to be a not insignificant threat of nuclear conflict in a number of places, but mostly these will be regional, right? And I know that sounds horrifying to talk about just regional or tactical nuclear weapons, but the Cold War era was global, right? We fire them all. You fire one, you fire them all.
Yeah, that's the concern. Right?
That's the concern. And so what the United States and NATO is doing, why basically every single NATO country is now pushing weapons into Ukraine, is the idea is basically, let's make this Russia's graveyard. Because let's say what happens. Like, let's say they actually got Ukraine. All right, great. You have Ukraine. Good job. But are you any better off, right? Actually, you add in Ukraine. If you added that part of Russia to Russian territory, you have a worse border. It's all weirder. You have all these Polish people above you. You're right next to the Germans. Like, you're still vulnerable. So you need to push farther. You actually need to go basically to Romania. You need to go through Poland, and need to go all the way to the Baltic Sea. That's those gaps I was talking about. Ukraine itself isn't enough. It's actually just on the way. And
if they can't make it through that, then
that's the plan. This is the general plan in the West right now. It stops here, right? That's seriously, this is the plan. Ukraine is being given the most, like, this is the most well-funded proxy war, potential insurgent guerrilla operation that the world has ever seen. And realistically, it doesn't look like the Russians have the capacity to actually do this. So this is actually a good thing for the world in the end. Their military is going to fail, the conventional side. However, the key thing is what happens, like you said, with the nuclear option. So the real problem, well, there's two problems. First, if they succeeded in Ukraine, they would feel emboldened, and then they would go on to attack NATO countries. And then the answer is nuclear war, because the U.S. would obliterate them. You know what I mean? Like, right. They're like, oh yeah, you managed Ukraine, good job. Meanwhile, like,
because that's been the whole thing is like, hey, we can't actively like put, we can't take necessarily an active role in defending Ukraine, the no-fly zones, all these things, because that's just that step towards, what could be seen as, direct U.S. aggression, and that would be, no good. That's kind of it seems to be the general consensus of like, hey, we got to stay out of this as much as possible. But I mean, just like you said, the amounts of money that is being funneled into, Ukraine for weapons and defense stuff, it's like,
and real weapons, man, howitzers, like all sorts of drones. This is extremely, extremely well supported and supplied. Right. It's impressive.
Yeah, it is impressive, but all at the same time, you think on the back end, it's like, man, like we're already in more debt than we've ever even like imagined the number. So like, what is that doing now that like, I look at that like from a financial perspective, and I have some different financial questions I want to ask you later. But like what is that going to do to us as a nation? And at the same time, like maybe on the other hand, does it really matter because everyone's just making like fake money, and like we're just like, where's all this stuff coming from? Like, like what is all this going to mean in the future for that kind of like,
I mean, so the crazy thing is this Ukraine war is part of like, it's really the domino for kind of COVID was like just the prelude to the new world rendering. And really, this is the first domino.
Be saying that.
Who? No, but right. it really is true though. It's crazy. It's crazy when you think about it. And there's so many things that are coming down the pipeline that right now we kind of have Biden in particular is trying, he's almost doing like a sort of boomer theater in a sense where he's like, hey, like we are defending freedoms again, everybody else, and we're fighting Russia, and it feels really good. But this is all going to fade soon enough. Ideally, Russia does get sort of stymied there. That's ultimately a good thing, just so it doesn't expand further. And yeah, there's definitely all sorts of economic challenges coming, and they're even broader than just, you know, that in the scheme of things, the sending some weapons to them isn't that big a deal. But what's happening, the view from 30,000 feet here. So the 1990s, we were talking about Cold War ends, and let's integrate Russia, and then also particularly with the China into the WTO and China, further integrate China. The two big bads of the global system, right? These are the two bad boys. You know, North Korea, these aren't the same level, right, as the Iran, and they're not quite the same level as Russia and China. So, and the way it kind of worked out economically is that what basically happened is Russia provided the inputs. It provided the oil and the coal and the natural gas and the minerals and the metals and all that. It's the largest country on earth. It has no industry. When the 1980s sort of opening up of Russia, it cratered the really inefficient Russian industry, and it never recovered. All they did, so they didn't like use their own resources. They sent it to the rest of the world, and that made all these resources cheaper. That made natural gas for Germany much cheaper. That made energy in general for Europe cheaper. It made metal prices, all this stuff much cheaper. So that added a major deflationary effect to the entire world economy as the price of major inputs are all reduced, particularly energy, which is an input for everything. And then you have the China side of things. China's role basically was to do the outputs. Russia gave a lot of it, and then China produced all the things. It assembled all these things, all the manufactured goods. They were built all around the world, finally assembled in China and sent around the world. And the net effect of that was also a major deflationary effect, because you had the equivalent of hundreds and hundreds of millions of super cheap workers that just entered the economy, right? There's no difference like buying something. I mean, I'm sure you've bought something, you're like, that is a really hefty piece of steel and iron that's welded, and it was like $15. How does this work? Like, I'm sure you've had things like that you bought. You're like, how does this work?
How did I get this so inexpensive?
Yeah. Well, it's basically like you have basically peasant cheap labor in China that is equivalent like to being next door to you, because the transportation costs are so cheap, the shipping costs, all of it was super cheap. But this is all done. So exactly. Was. So yeah. The Russia thing is about to crater, about to see huge. We're seeing the largest rise in commodity prices all around the world we've seen in 60 years. I actually just tweet. I never tweet, but my tweet, I went on there. I was like, so I guess I can say anything now. That was my thought.
I don't know if it's done with, but
and then I just end up just saying the exact same things I say, because I don't know. That's just what I did. But yeah, it's we're seeing, you know, we have the highest food prices in the world, and we're about to see, I mean, the really dark stuff. Well, I'll get to the really dark stuff in a second, but basically, we're seeing all these commodity price increases. So inflation is up. And then we're going to see the same thing when the China side of things break down. You're going to see the whole manufacturing inflation. And you have to see the rejiggering of the entire industrial system. And you're going to have to do this while the entire sort of global supply chain thing is still messed up.
Right.
And you're having energy costs increase the cost of shipping. That's a big, you all got to remember. Everything that you ship anywhere, you have higher energy prices. Mm-hmm. The cost of literally everything goes up.
Yeah.
So it's this, and so I was going to say, how does this relate to economics? Inflation is here to stay. I don't know who anyone is listening to. Like a lot on the conservative side, there's this sort of Milton Friedman 1970s thing where all of the you know, inflation is just from the Fed. It's all the Fed. It's like, yes, there's central banks can do all sorts of terrible things, but there's also deeper structural things, right? And one thing that's happening as the population ages, you're losing productive workers, right? You're going from, you know, the guys who are, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50, who are like, no, if you're 45 years old, you're at the top of your career, you've paid off all your stuff, you're just minting money, your kids are probably gone, you're at the top, you have all this money, and you feed it into the world, you put it into pension funds and all these different things, versus you're like, you know, a 10-year-old or whatever, and you're consuming all this stuff and you don't pay for anything, you don't develop any money. The problem we're entering is that we just have a much less capital rich world in general. So all this money that's been flooding into crypto and flooding all over the world, that's all going to start pulling back. It's going to pull back to the dollars, it's going to pull back to other stuff, but it's also going to raise the cost of capital everywhere in the world. Right. So I know this is starting to sound grim, but that's what's happening.
You know, I think a lot of times, at least when I've made the realization, a lot of people maybe still have yet to realize when it comes to some of these real in-depth things that, you know, most of our shows that we do here are not nearly as in-depth as what we get from you, which I like a little bit of variety of everything. That's why I really appreciate some of these things that you talk about, because we have to realize that like all of these things impact us. And, you know, because I used to be one of those people that like, I thought like politics doesn't impact me. It doesn't even matter. Even if I did care, this, that, whatever. Well, you know, everything trickles downhill, and I kind of see it as or a good analogy would be like this is a traffic jam, in whether it be economics or, you know, geopolitical tensions, whatever it is. Like we're entering a traffic jam, but most people think like we're sitting in the traffic jam. But what's really happened is the accident has just occurred and the traffic jam has just started, and it takes time. And even after the accident has been cleared, you still sit in traffic until everything else keeps on, gets moving and catches back up. And that's like, people don't realize like, well, my bacon was twice as much as it was last month. Like when am I going to pay the regular price for it? Never. Because that's how inflation works. Like that's how these things work. And you can't go back and change this accident, and you can't go back and change the time that you know, sat there in traffic, because it's changed your reality moving forward forever. Like you can't, I don't think you could, at least that's my view. Like it doesn't seem like any of this can ever be even remotely, you know, rewound to even something close to what it was before.
No, 2019 was really the last year of the world that we knew. And I think anyone thinking about food and price inflation and shrinkflation, where you get less of an Oreo than you used to,
and that's been happening for a long time, and we just never realized it because they were so good at it.
But now you're like, I needed that Oreo. That was how I would feel good today. No, it's a bad thing. But what's happening? So the dark side of what's going to happen. So we talked about the energy stuff. We talked about the Chinese manufactured goods. We talked about, I mean, obviously the suffering in Ukraine is bad, and I think people should be aware that Ukraine's not going back to, like, there were the same way we have a higher and more expensive bacon, and that might be here for a while. Ukraine isn't going back to something better. So people might not know, but Ukraine is actually still in a worse economic position than it was. You know, it's worse than it was when the Soviet Union fell. It never actually recovered systemically across the country, like the U.S. does after a recession. And so what's going to happen in Ukraine is one of the things that's happening as it realizes it's not going to achieve its aims is that it's starting to just destroy civilian infrastructure. So obviously kill civilians, but it's also just destroying all the things that make Ukraine function, so that if it's not going to be basically it's like, if you can't have it, if we can't have it, nobody can have it.
Sounds like government.
It sounds like government. Yeah, nobody can have it. So that's bad. And so things are going to, I mean, it's really unfortunate, because even though we are supporting Ukraine, supporting the Ukrainian people, what the U.S. government is really trying to do is it's trying to achieve its ends of, ending the Cold War and basically just finally putting the nail in the coffin of Russia, while not triggering a nuclear war. And but it's going to use Ukraine as the battlefield. And we're going to tell ourselves, that we're going to, rebuild this country afterwards. No, there's going to be so many problems and so many fires starting up all around the world. We think it's just Ukraine right now, but it's going to really spread. And one of the ways it's going to spread is food, like we were talking about. So food is getting more expensive here. And we've talked before a lot about agriculture. And we've talked about how the more, better agriculture you have, the cheaper, the more efficient, the larger your population, but also just the more stable and the cheaper prices you have. And more crucially, the less famine you experience. Because what we're probably going to see in the next few months, and definitely next year, is a famine or famines everywhere. Because Russia and Ukraine are major both food exporters and also fertilizer exporters. And people may not know this, but the reason we have this giant population in the world, there's this thing called the Green Revolution in the 60s. But the gist of it is basically we started injecting industrial chemicals into the land. Basically you started give it some steroid. No, okay, that's unnecessary. That's how I describe China and what they do. But in general, we just use industrial fertilizers. We have chemical fertilizers that give you nitrogen and potassium and phosphorus, and those are the main chemicals that plants need. And we're basically running out of those chemicals. Not only are they so the price of them going way up because you're losing the market for the Russian and the Ukrainian materials, and you have problems. Actually, one of the largest exporters of potash, this potassium fertilizer, is also Belarus, which is kind of part of the whole Russian thing. This means that the planting season, which is spring right now for a lot of crops, is they're just not planting as much food. Or if they don't have the fertilizer, they're going to get way lower yields than they would because you're basically lacking the nutrients. So we're not going to, not we, but like all around the world, a place like Egypt, for example, it's going to be really hard hit. It gets a lot of its fertilizer from Ukraine, and there is no place to substitute it, I guess is the way to say it. This is one of those things like oil. It's like, all right, let's just get some oil from somewhere else. It's like, no, buddy, we would not be dealing with Saudi Arabia if you could just find some other stuff elsewhere. That's the challenge, and we're going to see it with fertilizer, lack of fertilizer. Forget wheat exports. Like fertilizer is a real key thing you're going to start seeing more about in the next few months on the news. And the way it works is you have a planting season. You plant the spring crops, and you plant winter ones, and then like clockwork, you can see how many people you can feed. And we haven't seen famine. The United States, the continental United States, has never experienced a famine. But other countries are not so lucky. China has experienced a famine once every 2 years for about 2,000 years. And that's what I mean by shit land.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's why I wonder too. This is kind of a side topic that we don't necessarily have to get into because I don't know really anything about it. But I've heard discussions about, the way we do like monocropping in the United States, and eventually, like, is that going to be an issue for us to where we aren't able to, even if we have the fertilizers and all the things we need, like able to, get that yield from our crops that we need to support our population. It's like, woof, like that's kind of scary too. So it's like,
that's huge. No, that's a huge topic. So, and I was actually in college. Everybody was really, back when I was in college, everybody was so into permacultures and let's move away from monocrop agriculture. And there's a lot to be said about that. There's certain ways we use. So other chemical, also people need to realize that natural gas, like you get nitrogen. One of the ways you get nitrogen fertilizer is actually the synthesis of natural gas. So it's one of the things that comes from it. So you raise the price. All this stuff is connected, unfortunately. So it kind of spirals out. But getting back to the monoculture stuff, this is interesting. What we're actually talking about in a weird way is the old difference between the old world crops, what you kind of grew in the Fertile Crescent, basically Eurasia back in Mesopotamia, all that kind of stuff, and then what they did in the New World, basically Mesoamerica, like Mexico, and the Andes, like modern day Peru. In the New World, because we're here now, we did permaculture stuff where you basically have multiple different crops and you do all this kind of stuff, and there are benefits to the ecosystem there in a local way, but there are serious problems with monoculture. Large-scale industrial agriculture, but it's the only way to feed people right now that we have. So, and the way it works is that if you don't have, so you can kind of flip it. If you wanted to do this permaculture stuff everywhere, you know what I'm talking about with permaculture? Have you kind of heard that phrase before? It's basically the opposite. So instead of just like rows of corn, you'd have multiple
recycling
things.
Different types and doing different things in different batches, do one this year. So you're not using all of the certain, properties and chemicals or nutrients from the ground that, certain plants and things use. And
yeah, cool. As long as I just didn't want to be talking about and you didn't have the image of it. Yeah, but if we did the permaculture thing, you'd need way more land to feed the number of people that we do now because there's a small yield. And the other problem with it is that it's not as easy to do basic mechanized tool agriculture. So when you have all these fields, you can get a combine through it and you can harvest it and you can thresh it and you can do all this stuff easily. And one of the challenges actually in China and in New World agriculture has always been that their land is really bad. It's hilly, it's bad, and it's not good for mechanized agriculture. That's always reduced the yields they could potentially have. And it's a real problem. You basically want land that you can use modern tools on. That means chemical tools and it means mechanical tools, right? All of that is extremely important to getting high reliable yields. And I'm saying this after having spent quite a long time when I was in college, like wondering about a glorious future of like biofuels and permacultures and stuff like this. But it's a problem with everything, man. So even another area, replacing, everybody wants electric vehicles, right? And so one of the toughest things to make electric is a plane. They have to fly really far. It's really big batteries and basically use a form of kerosene to do it. So one good option has always been to, why don't we make a biofuel that we could use instead of that? Well, you do the calculations, you basically would need you'd need to plant a region like larger than like Pennsylvania, Kansas, and Virginia put together to basically have enough fuel just to send U.S. planes around, planes for the U.S. population. It's a massive amount. It's the same challenge where it sounds good in the lab or when you're in university, and you don't have to think about scaling it up.
Right.
But this is the thing: you got to scale it. If it doesn't scale, it's like you just broke the thing, which has problems. But you're gonna have to go back to the field. If we want to do permaculture, we'd be in the fields feeding ourselves again, probably.
Right. Well, it's the same. I guess it's the same argument as even electric cars. It's like it's great the idea of electric cars and being able to not burn fossil fuels to get around, but where do we get the power to charge the electric cars from? Well, are we going to do nuclear? Because it sounds like that's a leading towards a better option, but typically the people that aren't down for fossil fuels and people hear nuclear power plants, it's like, oh no, you hear Fukushima and all these different things. It's like it's so scary. I get the technology has changed, but like we can't plant enough windmills to charge everyone's car in the United States if they're all electric. So it's like, and even a side note, I saw something the Biden said the other day that they were going to make all of the military vehicles was it carbon neutral? I think it was. I think it was carbon neutral. And I'm like, God damn it, it's awfully hard to make an F-18 carbon neutral. Like, I don't know if that falls under, vehicles, but we forget to like in not only like with the EVs and the recharging them and how to use to recharge them, but like, what are we doing with the mining and the collection of materials it takes to build these things? You hear about these stories that these basically kids over in Africa are like digging these things out. It's like, man, like
in the Congo. Yeah.
Like, what do we do? We lose track of the real big picture and being able to, like you said, that 30,000 foot view, and not only like being able to see it from a 30,000 foot view or the 1 foot view, but being able to see all those layers throughout the entire thing and really kind of put all that together. It's like, it's tough to do when these ideas, like you said, sound great, but are they practical? How are we going to implement them? And we just don't know how, it seems like.
Yeah, and I gave a one-off thing earlier about how it's going to be really tough to implement the whole green vehicle revolution. And a big reason why is all of the materials that we need for these vehicles are, they're scattered all around the world. Yeah, it's a complex supply chain. Yeah, it's and unfortunately the war in the last basically this war and then the year before, it's erased all of the gains, the decreases in the cost of batteries, which is the key thing. This is the key innovation we need. Like if you want an electric future, I mean, I'm happy to, if we could have a world where we had solar power and it was just wind and it all worked, I'm all for it. Sounds great. You need batteries. Like batteries are the key thing. You have to store the energy that you put in your car, and it has to be in a big battery. And you have to store the energy that you're getting from intermittent sources like power sources like solar and wind. So that there's sort of, in the power system, there's a base load, which is typically nuclear, coal, natural gas, where it's just like there all the time. And you have natural gas in particular, which could kind of ramp up quickly. And then you have the solar stuff. The problem with the solar and the wind is that it's intermittent. And the only way to solve that is to have giant batteries that will store the stuff that you're not using at the moment for when you need it.
Without any lossage.
Without any lossage. But again, just the batteries, man. The ramp up we would need in batteries, you need to start investing in mining operations all over the world and in all sorts of places that you probably don't want to be. Right? It's like we thought it was miserable. We had to deal with Saudi Arabia for oil. Just wait until you're dealing with like every random country for this little mineral. Yeah. And again, I think it's I think a world where we didn't have to deal with these dictators is good. I think a world where you're using better. Honestly, just the fact that Tesla has made cars sexier and the tech inside them better is a net plus. Like there's now screens. It's a lot of stuff is going better, but it's tough, man. It's really tough. And most of the world also, just some places are never going to have renewable future. Like a place like, if you don't want to use nuclear power, Germany, I'm sorry, you can never have a renewable energy economy. The sun never shines. The sun never shines, bro. Like, I don't know. It's overcast all the time. You have all these solar panels that you've installed that don't produce anything because the sun doesn't shine. And
did I see properly that they were shutting down a couple of their nuclear plants, or they were considering it or doing like, it was like,
well, so this is one of the things where there's a big change in. So yeah, they were planning to shut them down because of Fukushima. That was what I think Merkel and the Greens really wanted it in the left coalition. Well, not with Merkel, but in the current left coalition in Germany. But now Russia's here and they're thinking, so how do we get rid of all this gas and this oil? And if you get rid of nuclear, they're just unwilling to face reality. The reality is, if Germany's going to be burning coal pretty soon. Spoiler alert. Like after all their talk, they're going to be burning
just
coal.
Like deglobalization, right?
they're going to be burning not even just coal. They're going to be burning something called lignite, which is like the nastiest, dirtiest type of coal, which is what they have. Because they're boxing themselves in, like you said. Well, we can't have nuclear because of that threat, and we don't like natural gas because it's not clean enough. And suddenly you're like, okay, well, I guess it's just wind and solar in a place that doesn't have much of those.
Well, I saw a press release that was like, I don't remember who it was now. It was one of their officials or something. Was like, yeah, wear an extra sweater this winter. And it was like, well, excuse me? Like what? Like, it was funny you mentioned or maybe not funny at all, but like the battery thing. I had a little first world problem thing today where I had to get a battery for a cordless drill. I had to get an additional one. And I've been pretty heavily involved in construction and those types of things for, a good majority of my life. So like I've had that, like, I feel like I'm getting old. Maybe that's all it is. Where I have that like receipt in the back of my head. I'm like, I remember I used to pay this much for this before. And I was like, and I went into the store. I'm like, man, like, I don't want to do this because I know these things aren't cheap, but you got to do it. And I kind of had like a price tag in my head that I was thinking of. And I walked in there and I was like, holy shit. Like, and it was like, all it was like just the battery. So I'm like,
you mean the rechargeable one that you slot in the bottom?
Yeah. So like,
what it cost?
It wasn't cheap, but it was. Buying one battery cost me almost as much as I remember probably 5 years ago spending on a tool or multiple tools in multiple batteries with the charger. And I realized they don't even now. A lot of times they're not even selling batteries with the tools anymore. You have to buy them separately.
Weird. Wow.
Because they're all chained up and they're all locked in. And I live in an area where typically things aren't locked up like that. I live in a fairly rural area, and you go to the city and you see some things locked up. Sometimes they're easy to steal or whatever. But like now, like even in rural areas, like the batteries are just like locked down.
Locked up.
Oh, it's like
weird.
I'm not used to seeing this. Like I knew it was a thing because I've been to places that seen it and like it makes sense. But it's like, man, like so like I feel like what you're telling me is we need the aliens to come and give us fusion power. Is that our only way out here? If the aliens come and break us down the fusion power?
God, I don't know. I mean, it would be nice if that's what they want to give us when they arrive. If it was just some fusion power of all the things they could do. If they would give us fusion, I'd be pretty happy.
But they're like, hey, but you gotta knock this nuclear warhead shit off, guys. Like,
yeah, right. You gotta knock that off. But no, I mean, what's gonna happen in Europe? So just looking a bit down the line here. We have a weird war going on, right? Where we have a war where all of Europe is ganging up. That's not the way I'll put it. Russia invaded Ukraine, and now all of Europe has kind of unified into supporting Ukraine together to fight Russia. Right. Yet at the meantime, Russia is supplying them with all of their energy that they use to function.
Right.
So one of the things that is coming down the pipeline and that's kind of imminent is pretty soon the Russian energy infrastructure, the whole system is going to crack. It's going to break. They're going to have to probably shut it all down because these kind of like their military. The Russian infrastructure is pretty old. It goes through Siberia. All of the Western firms that used to maintain all of the new equipment, all the stuff that keeps things functioning, they've all left. Everyone has left Russia, and the Russians don't have the technical talent. All right, all the smart people leave Russia when they get the chance to maintain this stuff. And so what's probably going to happen is they're going to have to shut off their pipes to prevent them from bursting or to flowing back all the way back to the wellhead in Siberia and causing even more problems.
Doesn't sound good.
So that's going to take 3 to 4 million barrels of oil a day off the market. And then this is when the new world disorder really starts.
I haven't heard that one yet. I like that.
I did a little I did a little video that was called that. I thought it was really clever. Yeah, so this is when the New World Disorder starts.
That would be the title of this episode. I like that.
Yeah,
you might be stealing it.
Yeah, take it. And then the U.S. is going to have a real decision about what to do. Because, for right now, we're like, oh, we're going to, Germany, everyone in Europe's pretending like, oh, we're going to wean ourselves off of Russian gas in like a year. Get out of here, dude. No, oil and gas. It's like, please. No, you missed the boat to sort of prepare for this. And it makes sense. In Europe, Russia's right next to you. You try and find a way to deal with them, and you try to make it work, and then it fails. And then, if you're Germany in particular, you finally give up and go your own way. And we've seen cycles of this throughout history. This is kind of the way things happen when those are your neighbors. You kind of have to try and deal with them. You end up with the same miserable cycles over and over again. But then the U.S. has a decision, because we're going to see enormously inflated energy prices. And we're going to be like, right now we're in this kumbaya, boomer, like, I don't know, boomer nirvana where we're fighting the Russians and everything is back to normal. And then we're going to have to actually decide, well, do we want to, keep supporting Europeans and other people with a lot of oil, because we now produce enormous amount of oil and natural gas. Do we want to do that while all Americans at home are dealing with prices like they've never seen? So I'm in West LA, and there's a gas station with $7 gas as its top line stuff, which I don't put in my car. But still, the fact that I'm seeing $6.99 and 9/10 is pretty crazy. But that's really just the start if you lose oil. So, well, I just want to get this in really quick. Like oil, like we were talking about with these like batteries and other stuff, like oil is a very like inelastic market. Like you don't get new supply. It doesn't pop up, right? It's like, oh, it's like suddenly if you had an iPhone that was like $5, it's like everybody would buy an iPhone. If it was literally $5, you would just do it. Another way, if it's crazy, you have a lot less demand, but you have to buy oil. So people buy it regardless, and you don't get more or less buying if you have to buy about the same amount. And so you get a real problem when production gets taken offline. Prices just rise. Like you can't do much about it. And Biden trying to release things from the strategic reserve, like that's just populism. That's just populism. You're trying to.
There's not enough. There is not an additional production.
It's like a joke. Yeah, it's a joke. It's kind of what that is. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't a joke. But yeah, and so the U.S. is going to have to decide, because in 2015 they had a bill passed that basically allowed the U.S. to forbid the export of oil and natural gas. The president can do it as a national security measure. And so when the Russian system breaks down, and you just think about it right now, this can't continue, right? You can't have we're fighting, we're all uniting against Russia. Meanwhile, they're giving us all this stuff. We're not accepting all that. But basically, this is going to happen regardless. You're not going to keep. This is how they make their money. But even more importantly, it's like the actual technical infrastructure is going to break down, and it's a real problem because it's probably going to break down for a long time. The last time it broke down was at the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989. Russian industry just collapsed, right? And then all the energy that used to be used by Russian industry, and it collapsed because it opened up the economy, and then all of their products were like really cheap, really bad, really expensive, really poorly made, really ineffective, all that kind of stuff, really uneconomical. So it was just obliterated by competition. And then all the energy that used to be used in Russia, it all collapsed, and they had to shut this stuff down. And they only got it back, functional a few years ago. That took decades to get it to work because it's infrastructure in Siberia. When things go wrong, you have to check it. Like if you just turn it back on and there was a bit of a pressure, problem in a certain weld, that burst in the boom, exactly. So it's dicey. And so this is going to be the biggest energy shock since World War II. It's going to be way bigger than the 1970s stuff. And I know that again, this is like a doomsday prediction type stuff here, but this is where we are. And then we're going to have the next decision is, well, okay, does the U.S. hive itself off from the global energy market? Do we just cut ourselves off and say, all right, Europe, we were really with you there and we still got to support Ukraine, but we can't fuel all of you without too much pain to our citizens. And there's a midterm election coming up right. And, we're going to knock it off. And so that is a real problem. So you're going to see the world dealing with a lack of both Russian and American energy. And this is, this is the chain reaction. This is one of the more probable chain reactions that leads to the destruction and collapse of China, which is why I'm trying to race to finish my book and get all that done because I want to.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah,
how that was going.
So all that and this is what's going on in the background, right? This is the energy system. So I remember being younger and running. Why are we in the Middle East and why this war? Iraq and Afghanistan. It's so stupid, so dumb, and all true. That's like not wrong.
Well,
but
there's a lot of reasons for those things.
Yeah,
right?
But the importance of energy isn't wrong. The energy is that important. You know what I mean? And then it's not like obviously you do it better, you do all these things, and maybe don't do that way, all that kind of stuff. But energy is that important that even the U.S. will go to war, other people will go to war, and what we're probably going to see, like to get back to the question of like, do the aliens? We need aliens to give us fusion, or what's probably going to happen in Europe is they're going to start going pretty neo-colonial and start, cutting some deals, trying to get some stuff from, North Africa, West Africa, places they can reach. They're going to resuscitate a lot of old colonial linkages, see if they can get the stuff they need to re-support their economies. I mean, one of the things that's happened is our discussion of colonialism, imperialism, all this has gotten really distorted. And, because in America, we have people from all over the world. So it's part of the identities and the clashes and all this stuff of like, well, this is stuff, but there is real relationships between various regions that were part of one colonial system. And it's bad, it's weird, it's painful, it's oppressive, it's all that. But there's actual relationships there that you can use, whether we're applying pressure or not, to get resources you need. I mean, that was the reason they exist in the first place. And now if we're back to a world of necessity where you're looking at 150, 75, 200 someplace oil, you do what you got to do. And this is what I mean when I say, the German Green Party that wants to run on solar panels in a place that can't have it. And, not all this. This is when things start to change, when you start to realize, okay, people, do we want to have heat in the winter? Right? Do we want to have lights when the sun is out?
Are you telling me that Ireland is not going to be able to provide all of the world's solar power? Is that better? Or Seattle? Maybe that's where is that basically what you're saying? That's
yeah. God.
It's funny to see, like, to understand, I guess, because I don't, like I've told you before, I am far from knowledgeable on basically anything. I just kind of pull in pieces and parts. But if you put a little effort into that, like, it's such a far jump for the normal person to go from, just not understanding any of this. And when you start understanding just little pieces of it, you go, well, this doesn't seem like this is going to work out very well. Like, yeah. We keep getting told, like, this is the way to do it. This is the way we got to do it. And it's like, I guess, is it, what do you think that is part of the, cause like you said, I'm all for green. I'm all for windmills and solar panels and, being able, this renewable energy that doesn't, pump out a bunch of, carbon and pollution and all these things. Like, that sounds great. Like, that, awesome. I'm on board. But if it's just not physically possible, like, why are we continuing to say that, hey, this is what we got to do and we're going to do it in 5 years? Well, like, 5 years for an entire country's infrastructure to be changed like that. I'm just throwing numbers out, obviously, but like, is the motivation just that political, at least in the United States, is it just that political motivation of like, well, I only got to like live this life for 4 years or 8 years or 2 years, whatever it is, if I'm in the Senate, like, is that really what it boils down to? Is it like, are they just that hopeful or are they just that ignorant? Like, how do you make sense of all that?
Well, I definitely think all these people, current politicians, putting out, deadlines and sort of targets that are going to be hit when they're not in office and they can't be in office. That's an easy thing to do, right? Like, if you're the governor of California right now and saying in 2035 you're going to be here, it's like, well, you're not going to be in office. So pretty easy to say. That's a big thing. But also kind of on a deeper level, I feel like particularly for the political left in Western countries, there's a need to find an optimistic vision of the future that people can work for and feel motivated to achieve. So I think there's definitely a vision of inclusion and racial harmony and sexual acceptance and all these things. But I think one of the bigger ones has been it's basically been a renew the earth, heal the world, environmental sort of vision, a vision of basically a society that is green and that has embraced all this stuff. It's been around like really in a strong way for 50 years. And there's something to it. I think there's probably, you could probably envision something a little better too, but that's been a huge part of it. No, it sounds really good. But it's become, it's become a dogma, the way it must happen, when it must happen. And unfortunately, even UN IEA reports, like International Energy Agency reports and all this, they say that the majority of the technologies that we would need to basically to hit any of these targets don't exist yet. They say that in the big reports, right? And the key thing is that this stuff could quite well be possible, but just not with our current technologies.
Right.
This is the key thing. I mean, it's like, it could be possible. It could be possible, but it's just probably gonna take a lot more time than we think. And it's going to be more brutal than we think to get there. And I think a real challenge is the narrative around climate change is pushing for as much urgency and action immediately as possible. That's part of the way that it is suggested that we'll be able to stop the changes and everything.
Right.
And that pushes for action now, and it's very effective and motivating, but it is a bit clashing with what is realistic. And there's real problems. I mean, the US and Europe have actually reduced a lot of their carbon emissions, but China has just so blown past
Right.
double, just it's like, well, what do you do, right? Even if you do the best thing you could do, you're not solving the problem. But I think actually a deeper thing is we need a better vision of, what a great future looks like. Because that's a part of it, definitely. But also, like you mentioned earlier, like, how about one where we're a little bit healthier? We're not all really unhealthy, like ridiculously unhealthy. And, there's a lot of things that we could be ambitious and inspiring about, and we're kind of pulling ourselves into a corner, and then it becomes like part of the political system, right. And it becomes total just dogma and like, well, I have to say X for this group, right. And I have to say Y for this group, and then you just trot out the same thing everybody says because it's just kind of herd mind.
Yeah, and I think that's the most disheartening thing for me, and maybe I see it happening more frequently, or people realizing that, where, we're talking about, green energy or, political fairness or whatever it is. Like, yeah, these are great things and they're great ideas, but if we can recognize that they're not feasible, like right now, just saying, hey, we have this plan in 50 years, this is what we want to be. Well, that's great. But what about 10 years? Like, and we're trying to push this 50-year deadline into 10 years. It's like, I feel like we're not looking at all the harm that all these things are causing. And it's not to say that we shouldn't pursue them, but I think what people are starting to, at least what I've seen, is we're starting to realize that, like, the facade of it all, and so then it degrades the trust and belief, if what little is left. And it's like, well, how are we going to get to this 50-year mark that we all agree is a really good idea, but we're ignoring the 40 years before that and how to actually get there, instead of working towards all these different goals. And it's like, it just seems like chaos. And like you said earlier, it just seems like it kind of goes back to, well, I'm only in office for 4 more years. Like, I'll let the next guy deal with it. And it's like, well, I feel like that's what we've been doing for the past, I don't know, 30 at least, if not more. Like, well, the degradation of trust in these institutions and, the government structures is, I think, doing more harm than not even being able to live up to certain standards that we're trying to aim for. And it just seems like these people in these positions don't actually realize that, by making promises that we can't keep, or, like you mentioned, the United States and these other areas going green, and we're doing great at, reducing our carbon emissions and all these different things. But if we're doing that for the whole world as a baseline and as, a goal, but none of the other countries are doing it, and all it's doing is just putting more pain and harm onto its own citizens, it's hard for some people to buy into that. And it's like, you really push people away because you're not being open and honest about, the actual cost and effectiveness and the actual ability to obtain these goals that we're putting out for ourselves. So it's like the whole thing just crumbles, and then people are just like, okay, let it burn, like whatever, and it's like, it's so disheartening to see, like, we can do all these great things, because we have these opportunities in the technology and the knowledge base and, in this country. But then it's like, we wasted on these like frivolous, political battles, I guess. And these little things, it's like, man, like, we could be doing so much more. Like, what is it going to take for us to kind of realize that as a nation, as a whole, like as a people, that, hey, there's this, like, there can be a center here. not everything has to be red and blue. Not everything has to be, you know, black and white, whatever it is. It's, hey, why not, let's come together instead of, you know, throwing shit at each other or, you know, trying to prove each other wrong. Let's put our ideas together and work towards something more. I just don't know if there's any way to do that, but it just seems like that's like where the real, you know, the trust gets lost, and then everyone just goes, screw it. Like, whatever. Like, it's like, where does that take us? Nowhere good. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think I was saying earlier, I feel like this is a period when our ideals are going to not just kind of rot, I mean, not just crumble, they're going to rot. Like our ideals are rotting when this happens. Like, I believe this thing, and then you see it's all lying. It just literally just rots in front of your eyes, and you're just, it disintegrates, and you're just, disheartened and just, you know, fed up with everything. I think it's a real thing that's happening. It's, you know, I think I was saying earlier, it's going to happen with green energy. It's going to happen with a lot of ideas about how quickly racial harmony, those sorts of goals can all happen. I think it's just, unfortunately, it's what's going to happen. But I will say, like I was saying earlier, when you have real crises, like real national, global scale crises, and not like one that's a sort of permanent thing, like climate change is sort of like everything can be called climate change, but it's also just, you know, it's a weather event, and we're getting to the point where it's like you're called the boy who calls cries wolf. It's like, right. Like in California, it's like every single thing I read about that is a major weather event, it's the first line is always like climate change. It's like, okay. But I just today, I'd rather just hear what the weather is. Like, right. It's just a little too much. But yeah, we're going to have to find out. But the one thing I will say is, like, the United States, in my estimation, is a compared to other countries, is a well integrated country. And you really see this when there are challenges put forth, when it has to unify for a real problem, like the idea that we need a war to actually bring us together. When things like this do happen, I do think, it's a raucous, miserable, loud, ridiculous, violent process, and it often seems ridiculous, but often the country does come together in a way. But you just need a real event. One of the U.S.'s problems is it's been just top dog, able to do whatever it wants and be ridiculous. You know, it's just you know, it's like a guy who is like king of the world and just decides to act like a jackass character or whatever. And like, you're just like, all right, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, I can do whatever I want. No one could stop me. No one could do anything. And it kind of helps. I mean, that's one way that kind of a lot of bonds and things will disintegrate. And a lot of I mean, it is kind of crazy that a country that was able to go to the moon, that the goals that we set for ourselves can be pretty minimal at times. So people are trying to come up with big ones, but we just gotta, you know, I mean, the truth is, man, we're going to all have to start upping our game pretty soon. I mean, the real thing is that and a lot of things are going to be proven impossible, man. So the green energy stuff is a great example. We get, 90% or so of our polysilicon, the stuff you use to make solar panels with, we get it all from China, right? And we do not have an infrastructure set up in the United States at the scale we would need to, you know, deploy and install all this stuff. So when the shit hits the fan with China, it crumbles. That whole industry has to reconfigure itself if it wants to function. It's going to have much higher prices. It's going to have to justify those prices. It's a real change. And so I think a lot of what's happening is the politicians, I mean, there's many reasons to describe why they're doing this, and they're just nefarious and they don't care and they're just short-term oriented, all this kind of stuff. And little bits of everything is true. Right. I'm not tossing it to the side. But the other thing is they don't have an accurate view of the world. They don't see what's coming. You know, you think they're in positions of power, but they actually don't have the view from 30,000 feet or a sense of history or time or where things are going. And so they're just living in a fantasy. Just like the same way like some guy who's just on the internet all day long in his mom's basement is kind of maybe doing the same thing. Right. But, you know, maybe there's a bit of similarity there. And what's going to happen is, unfortunately, the way that works is, you know, politicians are always concerned with their polls and what do people think, and that's what they're just looking at what current people think about a current framed issue just presented in a certain way. It doesn't let you get an image of the whole, and so that's why we have, you know, decision making and, you know, governing by crisis. So unfortunately, we're only going to see how we respond when we're like when it's right there in front of us, right? So I'm presenting kind of what might happen, like what's probably likely going to happen with energy markets and stuff, and it could happen in single digit months and probably within a year. But like, that's not what that's not what you read in the news. That's not what, you know, government official is going about his day-to-day office, you know, day-to-day life in office dealing with Ukraine. That's not what they're thinking. Often when you're actually in the thick of things, it's harder to get that wider perspective. I mean, that's one way that I'm not trying to defend them, but in general, I actually do think there's a relatively low level of competence in government. Like in the last 30 years, the smart people, they experience what government is like, and they do their best to get out.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
They can't retain talent.
Yeah, we've had that conversation a handful of times here, where it's like you realize that like and I don't mean to like besmirch like everyone that goes in the government by any means, because I think we really need the right people to be in government for it to operate properly. But you've realized, like, we've seen all these countless stories where it's like, oh, so and so's kid or grandkid or nephew, this, that, like, it's just like, it seems like it's been like these kids that are just, they've had the money, they've gone to college, and they didn't know what else to do. And it was like, well, my dad was a senator, so we have some funding, and that's what I'm going to be. I'm just going to be in government and whatever. But I think you hit on it, and it didn't really like strike me until now. A really good analogy was of, us being the top dog. And, it's funny, you hear the saying, the view never changes if you're not the top dog. Well, it's true. But if you're the top dog and you're always seeing everything from, rose-colored glasses, because you have the greatest view of everything. And it's like, until you have that competition, like you talked about earlier, like without competition, like you're never improving. So you're just stagnating. And if you just show up, if you show up on the field and you're just the best player and that's just how it is, like, you're not going to get any better. You're probably going to get worse because you have no one pushing you. So I as much as it's as scary as it is, like, and as ridiculous as it sounds, like, I guess us as humans need that falling in that realization of, oh no, we're not the best anymore, to go, I guess I better clean up my act and start doing something, because I've just been lazy. So maybe that's what we've kind of been for these past, since maybe World War II, where it's just been like, hey, things are good. What do we have to worry about? We just expect it to continue to be good.
Yeah, no, there's really something to that. I mean, the U.S. is like a kind of a ridiculous nation, like what it can do and what it's accomplished and the speed and all that has all happened. Totally unprecedented in history. It's not going to be repeated. And what do you do when you've been the largest economy in the world for what? Probably 100 and close to 150 years, late 18th, 19th century. All these people have tried to challenge you, and none of it's worked. You fought 2 wars at once on other side, on both sides of Eurasia, and won both. Right? It's like, it's crazy. And I mean, quite literally, the only thing that is actually motivating the United States at all is China. Right now, especially the military, people that are very competent and are like freaking out, and they're looking at some things, trying, there's a lot of folks in the government about China, like I said, because they're trying to motivate this stuff. But, once that's gone, it's like, get ready for some grand American navel gazing, because I want to say that, like, I think the truth is we're actually well positioned to survive a lot of these problems that are going on in the world, right? We have domestic energy resources in, the shale revolution really set things off. We have oil and natural gas here, so we can function. We also I live in Los Angeles, and this is probably the only major city on earth that actually could run on solar energy, because the Mojave Desert, which is one of the most, it's right next door. That entire, I mean, actually, I was driving through there recently, and I saw like farms there. I'm just like, no, you should be a solar panel. There's no water here. Like, there's no reason to pipe you some water. Just use the sun. Right. So this could work. And there's a couple places in the Southwest that can have it. The U.S. could work. The agriculture is here. The industry. We've talked about population. If we can politically find a way to do it, and we could increase the population from everyone in the rest of the world that's desperate to get in the United States. It causes political tensions within the country. So you have to manage that if you're a politician or if you wanted to do it. But you can grow the population to grow you could do all these things in the United States. It's pretty amazing. But again, when you have all these opportunities and all this, it's almost like you just don't care. It's like you're in high school, and you make varsity team in your football, and it's like the first year, do that in the second year, and then you're just like chilling, feeling like you're the king of school for years. Like, what do you care? Like, some freshman, I don't care. Like, whatever. Like, you don't matter. What do you have to work for? What do you have to do?
Right.
And I think we have a lot of that too.
Right. And I guess too, is there any situation where, where we could decouple from China on a pretty grand scale and actually for have it work. Cause I had the conversation with somebody the other day and I said this, and then after I said it, and I was like, I kind of like, that's more my opinion. Cause I'm not a professional on this at all, but maybe you can just straighten me out here. But it feels like kind of in a sense that China is almost like, look, like we don't actually necessarily need the United States as much as the United States needs us as far as, what we put out in products and whatnot. And it's because I guess what the conversation was, the impetus was that we were talking about some stuff around like the NBA and like Disney and some of the like the entertainment industry that obviously we make a lot of money off of China in that regard from, our products to them, but we kind of curtail and we kind of censor some of the things that we have in that country because of their desires and what they don't want to show and different things like that. So it's like, and my first initial thought was like, well, like we buy like so much of our products from them, but like, what does China buy from us? Besides the NBA and entertainment, like they don't necessarily need that, but like if we're going to sell it to them, that's like, well, that's like, that would take a giant chunk of our, our financial industry, I guess, out of the picture where we're like, hey, but we need like medicine and toilet paper. So can you help us out, guys? Like, I guess maybe how far off is that and how much of a connection is there between the things that our country actually needs to run that China kind of provides and, maybe just some of the bullshit that the entertainment like industry that we sell them, like how much is that like intertwined and is,
yeah. So China, that's always the question is like, are we more dependent on them or they more dependent on us? And we, in the US, we always focus on manufactured goods where it's like, they send a lot of that to us. We don't send as much to them, but there's a lot of other ways to kind of look at this. And one key one is getting down to food. I know people were always saying like, what, we're just going to sell them soybeans and they're going to sell us computers. Like who's really running the show here? But the reason we sell them soybeans is because they don't have enough land to actually feed their own animals. So if they don't get soybeans from us and from Brazil and a couple other places, they can't eat meat. Like the population doesn't get to eat meat. They have to eat rice.
Because they can't raise it.
They don't have enough land. So think about it. You have to, if you want to eat a cow, you want to eat beef, you have to raise the cow and the cow has to eat fodder. It has to eat grass, the whole time. So it's actually like usually 10x. You need like, if you want 100 pounds of beef, you're going to need another 10x that in the food you have to give it. So you need a lot of land. You need like just to get some meat. This is a big reason why a lot of people are saying we should eat less meat globally, because it's not because of like a vegan thing and like animals. It's like the amount of land area required for meat consumption is so. And even when I was in China, it's actually studying agriculture in China, and I was there, and I got this university lecture, and it was actually very interesting. But it was really one of the more sobering events. And when I was in China, I was like, they showed me all these maps of where food production is in China, what they grow, and how it's changed, how it's gotten better, blah blah blah. And then they were basically saying that it was 2012ish. They were saying, yeah, there is not enough. We cannot have a Western diet. Every single person in China cannot eat like an average American ever. Like that was in China. Yeah, the resources just aren't there. And whenever you get to a China scale thing, it's always like, well, what about the entire world export market? And you start to go, nope, even that isn't enough. Like you'd have to monopolize everything. So I bring up the agriculture because it's important. Like the basis of everything is agriculture. And China's actually probably looking at it, very likely could be seeing a famine next year. Right. You're already having weird, horrible problems in Shanghai for a separate reason. But they have a pig problem. They have some good, I don't need to get into that. There's agriculture stuff's a real thing in China. They actually have quotas where you basically, a farmer in China, you don't get to grow whatever you want that makes you the most money. They have quotas of how much grain they want you to grow because they're still worried that if they want to at least be able to control some basic minimum amount of calories that their population could consume, because they know that if they don't get enough food, they could have a whole destabilizing thing. So that's important. But even more importantly is that the U.S. more generally is the consumer base for Chinese goods.
Right.
China's internal market isn't crazy as it is. It's so big. It's not nearly as large as the U.S. Consumer market, which is like equivalent of, I think, of the next 6 countries combined. Right. So it's basically like how much money do you have to spend on random stuff that you want to buy off Amazon when you take away all your taxes and all of your bills for the month. That's the idea. And it's big. And that's what actually allows China to have all that manufacturing. So China has about a third of global manufacturing is currently done in China, or it's assembled there. But it only has about 11% of global consumers. So it's just at a basic rough estimation, it has an industrial plant 3 times larger than what it could sustain itself. So if it lost access to the U.S., it would have to radically end all sorts of production. It would have to close plants. There would be nowhere to go with all these goods. You get what I'm saying?
Right. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the kind of the end user, which would be us, and the products they're creating. So if we were no longer to consume their products, then there's no way for them to, build the, I guess, financial status to be able to continue to feed the population. In a sense.
Yeah.
Long story short.
Or even to be able to keep building those goods. Like, yeah, even to feed their population. But if they don't have this, so the big thing is we have options. They don't. There's no one that can replace the U.S. consumer market. There's no country. There's no set of countries that is as large. I mean, it's obvious. I think Germany has some other problems. Seriously. And so we have options, and we can move, production that is in China can move to Vietnam. It can move particularly to Mexico. It can move to Colombia. It can move to all sorts of places. Not actually that many places, but a good number of places.
Spread them out.
They don't have a consumer base to replace. Their idea was actually, the Chinese dream was to develop enough where you could internally self-generate your own consumption base the way the U.S. does. They didn't get there, though. They have 1 billion too many people to make that work. And they've stagnated, and now they're sort of at the tail end of where their system can take them. And you're seeing all these crazy, blow-ups in property sector, tech, all sorts of places where they pushed it way too far, and the consumer base wasn't what they expected, and now it's all radically shrinking.
Right.
That's part of what's going on there. But I'll say one thing that just to get back to what you were saying, that core question of so who needs who more? They need us more. But the big problem for us is that we are trying to pretend like this relationship is going to go on beautifully forever. We're basically like Germany and Russia with the gas. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
we're mocking them. We're mocking them. But Apple's like, oh, we're just going to keep manufacturing everything in China. There's no way that would be a problem. It's just people kind of need to wake up. But it's business. Again, it's seductive. They have cheap. Oh, actually, it's actually much more expensive now. It's actually, with advanced technology, you can do almost everything you could do in China really cheaply. That was really, really way cheaper in the 90s when it was less automated. You could do in the United States now for equivalent or even slightly cheaper. You just have to use more technology. So a lot of stuff will move back to the U.S. But the real problem is that manufacturing is no longer labor intensive the way it was. So you're not going to need as many workers anymore. So it's not going to give us the broad-based manufacturing sort of job thing that we had in the 60s. It's going to be one dude overseeing 30 robots.
Right. But I guess at the same time, it might be beneficial if we can bring some of that back to, our own borders.
It's happening.
It's interesting because you mentioned that, because it's just being very general, looking at, being able to create a product like China does for the consumer, that's us, and what that really means. But they have so many people and the land that's what's so fascinating about having these conversations with you, is seeing it kind of all connect, because it's you realize, well, China is in this situation that they need our consumerism, because they don't they need those trade routes, and they need that kind of, at least a little bit of globalization to kind of support their citizen base, because it's look, we have too many people that we can't take care of because we don't have the land to be able to live off of it. So we have to create these cheap products to be able to sell in order to, in a sense, kind of feed our own country. And it's you realize that it's a precarious balance there of, trying to hold that up. And then especially when you're looking at two different, entities with such different, ideals and ideologies and beliefs and all these things. It's like you realize that balance of trying to, and then obviously you have people in the US that have businesses in China. It's like that they're making a lot of money from. So it's like, I got to play nice with, their culture and all these different things. It's like, you realize how, just unstable it really all is. It's like, it's this constant like balance. Cause and even going back to real quick too, like I said, we've mentioned it in the prior podcast and whatnot. But if you don't understand like that, was it, when you look at the food and supplies that people need just to survive, they're looking at needing 5x what we would just on the, as a base level. Cause they have roughly 5 times the population that's so
between
like
4 and 5, closer.
Yeah. Like, what does that mean for like everything else that happens there? Like, if their country is only like, if the land, just specifically the land, is only able to provide, say 3/4 of what the United States is, just physical land, agricultural, materials, and those things. Like, if you're not able to produce as much raw material, the land you live on, but you have 5 times the amount of people to take care of, it's like you realize how dangerous that could be. And it's like, okay, now it makes sense why maybe China's not quite as big and bad and, scary as we, kind of are led to believe.
There's like never been a country as large that is as dependent on the rest of the world or other countries to stabilize and secure its own future. Like all the basic stuff. China doesn't just need like the stuff from us. They need minerals and materials and goods and things from all over the world. Remember, 4 or 5x of what we need. They have to get it all. They don't have all the resources in their country. So a big reason, two of the big reasons that they need the United States and why they're kind of more dependent on us is, one is consumerism. Like you said, we're the big consumer country in the world. The way we set up the world after the 1990s, across the second half of the 20th century, is we created production and consumption nodes all around the world. We could sort of split it. You had cheap shipping and manufacturing and stuff, so you could have those really cheap long supply lanes, and you could have a country like China that doesn't consume much, or Russia that doesn't consume much, and they could both produce inputs and outputs that you need in other places, and all sorts of other countries around the world did that. And it wasn't a colonial system, which used to be inside of one. All that used to be happening once inside of one colonial system. You could have it everywhere. That's a good thing for a lot of the world in this time. But what happened is that the consumerism, the consumer base, this is the result of the demographic stuff that we were talking about. We were talking about all these population structures are inverting. You can have more old people than young people. Right. That's a big problem. What that's also doing is destroying the consumer base of all these other countries all around the world. The German consumer base, dying. British, dying. Italian, dead. Spanish, dead. French will actually be okay. Like, they're actually disappearing. So the potential consumers for all the stuff that China builds outside of the United States, they're all on the downswing. Do you know what I mean? They're literally running out of people to sell to. So they actually need the U.S. even more.
So our bonds even getting stronger, as weird as as we pretend that it's not.
Yeah, no. So it's a real thing. I mean, China. I mean, at this point, I've been saying a lot of podcasts like China's it's 2 states in history. It has super ordered, semi-tyrannical, or more fully tyrannical type state, and then it has pretty like absolute chaos, like something like the chaos that you can't imagine in the United States. Like, we think, oh my God, things are so hectic here. It's like, right. No, dude. How about like, for example, I probably told you guys this before, but before the 20th century, the 2 deadliest wars in human history were both Chinese civil wars. And if you had a real situation of real state breakdown in China, you would easily see a war that would dwarf. You could easily see a death toll that could dwarf World War II.
I want to touch on that. But do you mind if we take like just a couple minute break? How long?
No, that's perfect. I'm going to turn the light, and then I'm probably going to grab a bit of food. Yeah, but let's do that.
Okay. You want to give you like 10, 15 minutes to get, I don't know how long you can go or what.
No, let's just keep going. I'm enjoying this, man. I haven't done this in a while. I feel like we could talk about, I don't get it. Like I was really saying, man, I don't get to talk, go more in depth about things. So I'm loving this. Let's do it, until we're feeling like we're dead or whatever.
All right. Can't get too crazy. It's 10:15 over here right now. So
Right. I always appreciate you guys, or you this time, just
I was
staying out.
Yeah, Tony
Staying
apologized that he couldn't make it. He had a bunch of stuff going on, and it's been crazy. But I always know, I really enjoy these conversations with you, and just the perspective, I guess, that I get from you. It's really interesting, and I think it really adds to what we're trying to do as a show. Is kind of looking at things, not always from 30,000 feet.
It's exhausting. You don't want to do that all the time.
Yeah, but also not always from 1 inch away, to be able to kind of, have that in flux and, be able to reach different people and.
Yeah, definitely.
And be able to, I guess the biggest thing is I would love to, I really enjoy facilitating other people's curiosity, because it's one of those things, like, I don't know if nearly as many people enjoy it as much as I do, but like, for me, it's like one of those things where, like, I guess maybe this is what it is sometimes, is it's like, the joke about, like, someone's like, oh, you gotta watch this video. It's like, it's so funny. You have to watch this video. And then, like, they like give you their phone and you're like, why? I don't feel comfortable holding your phone right now. And it's like, no, you just got to watch it. And you're watching it. And it's like, it doesn't turn out to be nearly as funny as you think it is. And it's like, this is uncomfortable. But I hope, like, my aim is my curiosity can strike people. I'm okay with making people feel uncomfortable. Guess what? You don't have to listen to the show. But I really enjoy it. So I'm just out there just showing my phone to everybody is kind of the idea of the show. And every once in a while, if somebody, like, if I hit somebody and it really, like, connects with them, it's, to me, like, it's the coolest thing. 'Cause I understand how that feels when you, like, something clicks in your head and you go, oh, like, this is awesome. And I want to do that across, all types of spectrums. It was funny. We just did an episode that was just kind of the people that normally just on the show. And, I started talking about the James Webb telescope. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And it's like, and I was watching this video about it and what it's going to do and all these different things. And it got to one part where it was like they talk about the sensor for the infrared light is like this super incredibly, like, incomprehensible number, like, thin, this coating on this thing and it's gold. And it was just like, all the advances we've made, and gold is still the best thing we have to, like, see the outer reaches of space. And I was like, and I like Göbekli Tepe and, like, all these in the Younger Dryas impact theory and all these things. And it's like, man, like, these are, and like, we're thinking, like, throughout, like, civilization, like, we're wearing gold around our necks, where, they're lining these sarcophagi. We talked about that too. I wasn't sure. Apparently you can say both. I didn't know
really?
That. Yeah. Sarcophaguses and sarcophagi are both apparently correct. So that means no one knows what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah. Right.
But it's like, those are lined in gold, and it's like, why gold? Like, it's besides the
shiny.
It's like, everything can be shiny, but besides from a technological aspect, like, that's still, there's nothing that beats gold in some technological aspects. So maybe
nature was onto something,
or
we don't even know what we like about it, but we like it.
Yeah.
And it works for space.
Or it was passed down because we almost got exterminated during the last ice age, and that technology was known before then. And that was just, like, how they were able to, like, slip it through. Like, guys, this is important. Like, don't lose gold.
Don't lose gold.
I don't know.
Yeah. I really like that. I mean, I actually wrote a big article about China and space, and I published it a while ago. And it was like, while that was happening, they were putting out that telescope, and it's just about how, is China going to go take over the universe? Basically, it's like, people are always worried about. It's like, no. But I thought that. I mean, I'm such a big fan of, like, exploring space. I think it's like probably a good thing. It wouldn't be bad to spend less than 1% of our money on that.
Yeah.
Seems like all humans forever have wanted to do that, and we can. Like,
yeah, why not? We might find something that gives us fusion power. Yeah, full circle. You know what I mean? Something.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I mean, just the way they had to like origami that whole thing in and like do it all out. They had apparently like a full model, like in Northrop Grumman somewhere, where they're just like, all right, before we do anything on the real thing, we're gonna do it on the one in the office first.
Yeah, and it was funny because we watched a short video during the show and we had it like posted so people, like anyone was watching the show, could see it.
Oh, nice.
And it was funny that Cass, who runs all of our electronic stuff and whatnot, typically she's not here tonight either, because I have to kind of do things different, but she was like, well, what happens if they get that thing all the way out there and it's like, because 1,000,000 miles away and it takes, was it like 3 months for the pictures to get back? They're like, hey, this summer in 2022 you should be seeing some pictures from this thing. She's like, what happens if it's blurry?
Yeah,
and like they can't fix it. I'm like,
people lose their jobs.
Yeah,
like,
that's a possibility, but I guess that's why they get paid the big bucks, you know?
Yeah, it looks like it's really going to work though. It's going to last. I mean, I remember I was following this like for a while and I was like, okay, it's out there. All right, it's deployed. Like we avoided the whole thing. It worked out. Yeah. And then they have like enough fuel to last for like 10 extra years or something. I heard that.
I was like,
so cool.
Yeah. So I'm super excited.
I needed that. I always need that little boost of like good news in the modern world. Like in the moment right now, it's just, it feels really good.
+1 for the humans. Yeah. I don't know which side is stronger or has more marks in it, the positives or negatives sometimes, but you know what? We're just keep on trying to add the positives to it. And
yeah, exactly. Let's just keep adding the positives and not like,
it is what
focusing
it is.
too much.
Yeah. I'll let somebody else focus on the negatives. I don't want to be
keep at it. Stacking the W's. Got to keep stacking those W's. Forget about everything else for the moment.
That's right.
I get that. God.
Yeah. I actually have some things I actually wanted to ask you about that too, but we can get to that if we get to it. But I've been wanting to, literally the impetus of this whole thing was I think it was like 2 weeks after we talked. And this is kind of where we left off before the break, was real estate and that whole Evergrande group debacle kind of started. And it was like, shit, like, man, if we just waited, like this would have been a really interesting topic. But like, so I saw an influx of news stories and things, and I guess I'll try to, brief it up real quick for everybody, but it was, it's like the second largest real estate kind of, I hate to use the word company because company is a real weird thing in China, government,
organization.
That's a good one. Yeah. So like, it's like one of the second largest real estate organizations in China. And they're like doing all this developing, but then like developing of homes and apartment buildings. And then like they got into this weird financial spot where like they basically couldn't pay their bills because no one's like moving into their properties. But they created just massive, like, I don't know if this is true. Maybe you can school me on this. I saw a couple pictures where they claimed it was like these, big, like you're talking like 10 plus skyscraper residential buildings in multiple areas like that were just completely empty and no one was buying them because the real estate market was like at one point the only place that the Chinese could, kind of keep the money that it didn't destroy. Like it just didn't dissipate.
True in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Not much different than here, honestly. There's only a couple places. But then like they were going to default and this was going to cause this giant, investment, real estate, financial catastrophe. And then I want to say a wave of COVID or the Russia thing happened and everybody forgot about it. And I'm still here going, wait a minute, what's going on? Are they going to go under? What the heck is happening? So like, I think that's kind of where we left off. You mentioned real estate. I didn't know if that's where you were going with it, but it seemed fit.
Yeah, Evergrande, man. I remember doing a video on it. I was like really long and it got cut off at the end. I was very frustrated about it. But the gist of it is like, this is the start of the breakdown of the whole Chinese property sector. And it's an absolute beast. I mean, you think, oh, China's so advanced, blah, 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 blah. At least, around a third of its GDP, 30%ish is just construction and real estate and development. That's like
mafia.
It's huge, man. I mean, it's so big. This is one of the things, like, you have to go to China to really, like, you just won't believe it when you're on a train and you'll see like apartment tower forests, like as far as the eye can see. You're not even in a city. You're not even in a city. You're along the track going to the city and you're seeing all this. That's bananas. Wild. It is probably, I mean, it's at least a $60 trillion bubble probably at this point. And it is,
60 trillion?
At least 50. Yeah, it's probably getting towards 60 now.
I think that's more than what our national debt is. I never knew a number existed that was higher.
It is probably the largest speculative asset bubble in history. It is insane. I mean, just think about it. And there's so many things that go into this. So first of all, it's like, if you're a rich person in China, this is not a housing market. Like, people in China are on their second, third, fourth homes. A quarter of the homes are empty. This is all about the lack of investment options in China. Can't send your money elsewhere. The stock market's a casino, so you pump it all into real estate.
You can't do it Bitcoin either because they outlawed that.
Crypto. You can't do anything. And so for years, it's just been real estate. And there's this whole nexus between the Chinese central government and the Chinese provincial governments and developers and the Chinese homeowners and buyers. Basically, they're all in bed together. The central government wants high growth. The best way to juice the growth really quickly is just to build a bunch of stuff, keep people employed. Right. And then so the local governments do that. And then they basically sell all this really cheap land. They have all these backroom deals with all these developers. They get all this stuff. They start building it up. Developers don't care about any individual property. It's usually garbage. It's not built to last. It's like terrible. Like you buy like an average apartment in China also. People talking about this real estate bubble. It's like, these are not amazing properties, right? We're talking like a 400 or 500 square foot apartment that comes without faucets, that is in a unit that is in identical unit in an identical tower surrounded by other identical towers. I mean, this is about this is a throughput. This is about producing as much of, again, it's juicing these numbers often, and it's about producing as much as possible. So the Chinese central government created these developers, right? Like, the incentive systems it created allowed an Evergrande to form.
And they never saw this? Like, they never were like, this probably isn't
they've known for at least 10 years, man, but they just can't stop themselves. They can't. Every time they try and pull back a little bit, things get shaky and they're like, no, we want high growth again. So they tamp back. And that's what's happened. I mean, so the reason we got this Evergrande thing is they put in new credit limits and you can't have this much debt. You can't do that. And suddenly the market freaked out a little bit. Evergrande couldn't pay a bunch of its debts. And we got in this situation. And I'm minimizing it and really simplifying it, but that's what happened. And then they're still like, well, we can't really let this fall because they've kicked the can down the road so long. For so long and for so far, you have a $50 trillion snowball bubble behind you. There is no answer for this. There's no answer. Also, here's the even worse thing. Demography. We've been talking about this a lot this time. The Chinese population is often said to be, I think, 1.4 billion people. And that is a lie. That is a lie. That is basically, it's propped up primarily by the Communist Party at this point, but it's just, well, you ask a simple question like, hey, a country that can only have one child per person for a long time now, 40 years, how exactly did you manage to get a larger population in the last 30 years? Anyway, it's a fraud. And basically, they have probably 150 million less people than they are saying.
That's still a lot of people.
Oh, it's still a lot. It's closer. But it's really important because think about it. You're suddenly a developer and you're building all your models based on 150 million more people.
150, that's half of the United States.
And also those are younger people too. That's so that insane. It's because it's like, say you have more new people, because what they're doing is they're artificially improving the look of their population structure. Right. So someone like me is looking at like, oh, how many people? And it's like, this is what Russia does. You're looking at it and you're like, that's artificially smooth right there, that curve. It sounds like the statistics department has been involved. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's what they do in these sorts of countries. And so that's what's happening there. And they're hiding. So they're also also hiding that there's probably way more women than men than we thought. Like historically, we've thought that there's maybe 40 million more men than women in China, right? You've probably heard about this. These are guys that structurally there's a bias against for men and against women. So Chinese families will, abort the girl basically.
Right.
And that's been going on. That's a long thing in China. And
which also, if they're trying to grow their numbers, that seems kind of counterproductive, right?
Yeah, that one isn't a central government thing. That is a people. That is a Chinese individual person thing. Really? That's not a government. It's rooted in agriculture, man. It's back in the day. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but back in the day, the man would help. The son would help. Well, would inherit the farm. He would do all the work. He would help his parents. Blah blah blah. Meanwhile, the girl, you basically have to pay to send her somewhere else. And then now it's a lot in a world where you don't have a social security net and you don't have a large family. Often the daughter has to, help with her parent. I mean, there's all these things where there's just been this structural bias against girls for a long time. I have friends from growing up. One girl in particular that comes to mind. She was, adopted by a family in Los Angeles because she was, found in a dumpster basically in China.
Yeah, I guess when your whole society and structure of that is built around commerce and particularly either physically hard labor or dangerous labor, historically those are jobs that are done by males. So it's like you're trying to fill that quota in a sense. It's like, man, I never thought about that either. Short side story. I worked with this gentleman who did some manufacturing work in China, and he was basically a mechanic engineer for these certain machines that were bought from this certain country. I want to say they were made in Germany. He was a German fellow. He said he went over there and he was helping them troubleshoot this big giant press, and they needed a ladder. So they're like, well, I need a ladder. So they brought the ladder in. He's telling me this person. He's like, I couldn't believe this shit. He's like, it was a bamboo ladder, which they do some incredible things, with bamboo. But he said,
for sure,
he said, this guy's climbing it and something happened where he had fallen off, and it was like a 20-foot fall. And he couldn't move. It looked like he had broken some bones. And he's like, oh my, he's like, what can we do? And all of a sudden, these two guys came in with a stretcher, rolled him onto it, picked him up, and this isn't a factory. It's not like paramedics. Just walked him out. And then he's like, well, what the hell? So a couple of days later, he had asked the supervisor, and he's like, hey, the gentleman that was helping me the other day, is he okay? And he was like, oh, don't worry about him. We have more men. And he was like, well, no, I but is he is he all right? He seemed like he was really hurt. Is he all right? He's like, we have more men. And that was it. And it was like, holy shit. So trying to put all of those pieces of that puzzle together and realizing this is an entirely different frame of mind than what we can even consider.
Human life and isn't valued the same way in China that it has been here. And also back in the day, you're a country with really bad land. Like I've said, when you have really bad land, you don't get a lot of capital. You don't have a lot of money floating around. So the whole brutal crushing burden of everything falls on the worker. And one thing China does have is a lot of people. Right. So the people are just sent by the government to do everything. Build this wall, build this bridge. All right, you fell off, tossed you under the bridge and just put you in the mortar. Next, go on. This is what it is. So, that's a big reason why you want a large population. But when you have a problem where we have too many men, in particular, you have a surplus, it's what do a bunch of guys who have nothing to do? This is why they keep them employed, man. Yeah, it's they go, they start a fire, start, get into a mob, start walking down the street, create a revolution. This is not what the Communist Party wants to see. So it's a big problem. But getting back to the other thing, they could easily have, close to 100 million more men than women if the honest numbers were put in. Because again, you redo it. There's less people. There's more women. There's less. It's just there's less men, less women, more men. Real bad. And that is that's what's happening. But the what was it? I was talking originally about the demographics in China to talk about the changed labor structure. I can't remember why we had gotten on that.
We were talking about Evergrande, the real estate issues and all of the.
Oh, yeah, and so that's what I was saying. The Evergrande, they had so you have structurally way less people, and the younger ones are gone. So all those young consumers who wanted homes that was part of your models, they're not there. And so what's happened is it's purely a speculative asset at this point. You know, they're parking their money in real estate because the people are daring the government to let prices fall, daring them because they know how bad it is, how important it is. It would be too destabilizing. So it's like a game of chicken where the government and the people are just like running up, like, you know, and it's a bad thing.
It sounds like
but it's going to collapse. It's a ticking time bomb.
Yeah,
this is one of the major things that could knock China off: energy prices, agriculture problems, real manufacturing challenges like they're having with the COVID, endless lockdowns. I mean, COVID just
that sounds real. Like it's getting real weird over there. Have
you heard the stuff about Shanghai?
I've heard a handful of things, but I just don't know. Like, that's a crazy thing when someone's like, "Hey, did you hear about this?" So it's like, well, you're gonna have to be more specific because shit's getting wild. Like,
yeah, no, it's just, I mean, Shanghai's unlocked, and starting in Beijing now too. I mean, the overall structure pattern here is they don't have vaccines that work. The government is wedded to a zero COVID, basically case policy. Their legitimacy of the Communist Party is at stake, and so the only answer when you don't have a long-term solution of vaccines, it's basically endless rolling lockdowns forever.
And it doesn't seem like that works. Like, I guess what's their thought on that? Because like, if they don't care about human life, like we just kind of talked about, in a sense that not in the, you know, in a just generalizing, like they have a lower level of human life care. And if they don't have to necessarily truthfully report at what goes on over there, because everybody knows they don't. I mean, haven't even gotten into the Uyghur people, which I still don't know what's true or not with everything going on there. But like, so like, why are they imposing these things? Like, is it like, what's the motivation there? If they could just not say anything at all, let their people go about what they do. And if they're dead, they just throw in a hole and forget about them. And they don't care about that. Like, what's the motivation for these strict lockdowns and all these things? I can't quite reconcile that.
This almost the singular motivation for everything China is doing right now is to keep China in one piece. And there's no great ways to do it. But if, you know, they're worried for the COVID thing, they stake their legitimacy on being like, we're the best public health nation. You know, we don't allow COVID. We beat COVID in the West, failed. Again, this doesn't sound like much, but they're running out of economic growth. That was what the Communist Party based its whole legitimacy on. It's like, well, you don't have rights. You don't have this. You don't have any of that stuff. But look at what we've delivered. Look at all the goods we've given you over the last, you know, decades. And hey, it's like you built a modern civilization. It's in a lot of ways, it's very impressive. But what do you do when that fades? This is the question. And they're running around trying to figure out what to do, because what's really happening is destabilizing problems are flaring up everywhere in China, right? You have manufacturing. I mean, we have the real estate stuff that we've been talking about. There's also a lot of heavy industry problems where you don't need any more bridges, China. You don't need any more skyscrapers. Like, this is all part of the same thing. It's like, can't build your way out of this one. And then they have a looming agriculture problem because of something with the pig. I mean, with their pig populations, and there's huge problems. Like they had to kill a bunch of them. It's a very difficult situation on that, and all this stuff is spiraling. And you also have real global geopolitical challenges, right? The U.S. is ganging up against you, basically from their perspective. You know, the alliance. Russia has been completely knocked out of the system. You've now seen. I mean, China's now seen what will happen if they do something against Taiwan, right? Most likely, I mean, obviously, a real thing.
Weird things have happened. It seems like in the news that they're still testing the waters and all that. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
They're testing their airspace a lot.
Yeah, just
they're
just
poking the airspace.
Just the I guess in general the Taiwan waters of like, oh, who's going to care about this? Like, it feels like you're poking the bear. But like, also, sorry to interrupt you, but like, these things you're saying, like, I kind of have a cursory knowledge of them, but it's only from my assumptions from the things that I see and talking to you, honestly. But like, so where are you getting because because it seems like there's so many things that like don't like get out of China on the news level. So like how are you getting like, because it's some of this information where you have these in-depth like, you know, understandings of these things when like, because I feel like I'm pretty adept at trying to find certain things and more than the average person because I do this, but like, how are you like hearing these things and knowing that it's, you know, it's not just propaganda and fake news, you know, or using the words like,
well, a lot of things are propaganda and fake news, definitely. You learn enough, you've been doing it long enough, you've been seeing how they describe and talk about different things, and you get a quick instinctive feel of like, I don't know about that. And then you dig a bit more, you know, you know where to look, and that's a lot of what it is. But I mean, the bigger challenge right now with China stuff is basically once COVID started, the information with everything constricted, right? They were like, oh God, we're kicking out journalists. We're doing all this stuff. There's real problems. It's very tough. So
you have a lot of history there for understanding that you've had before that normal people aren't seeing now.
You need an analytical framework that lets you kind of see what's going on. That's the key thing. Like that, like I have a thing where I can put a model where I can fit things into it. Like I something comes in, I don't see the news. I think, oh, you know, why is that being written? From who? For what audience? What reason? That's kind of what that's where we need. Eventually you can get to, if you could see what's behind the headlines, what might be motivating it.
So that makes
and you know the different sources. Like there's a tab, there's sort of like, not to cut you off, but there's a nationalist rags in China. There's sort of these tech rags, and you can see like in China, there's much more state control of information. So you can see in an article, it's like, oh, that looks very normal. Then it's like, wait, what is this weird CCP propaganda you were forced to put in at the end? You know what I mean? Like it gets pretty clear.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it was like me and like, because I've only been trying to like understand these things for the last couple of years, like I've told you about before, and it was like how does anybody make heads or tails of this if we know that everything that comes out of China is crap? Like especially now, like how does anybody make heads or tails of this stuff? And then, but I guess I didn't. It's kind of like I understand it now where like I watch, you know, whether it's CNN or Fox or MSNBC or whatever super right wing, whatever it is, like you kind of see the lens through what they're saying because of you followed it for long enough. But I guess I never put the piece together. And it's kind of fascinating thinking about, because I didn't look at this stuff pre-COVID. In pre-COVID, it would have been an entirely different story. So like, it's fascinating to know, like, see how these things like this demarcation is when things just completely change. So all the perceptions after this thing are different unless you're able to see them through that lens.
Yeah, definitely. And like the longer you kind of been looking, the more you see like, oh, they were really they were, you know, spouting out about this thing then, and then they started doing this, and then they pulled back, and then they just like, oh, well, what's the pattern here? Right? What's the underlying thing? And for China in particular, once you got, you know, I have a deep sense of it, you know, how it's developed forever. And then like specifically since the 1970s, so you can see what they had to do. And there's a lot of things that are objective, right? It's like, well, you know, what does energy cost in China right now? You know, there's a lot of things that don't have to necessarily be people's statements of things. And then a lot of metrics, there's also, it's like, well, that one's always fudged. so like what's the, you know, it's like, it's fudged, but it's also still decreasing. That's weird. You know, it's still lower than it was before. It's like still probably not true.
So it gives you an idea of what's happening.
So, yeah, but in general, I think the bigger thing is that we've all, this post-90s world, man, we just lost a sense of like what countries are about, what they fight for, you know, like, you know, what is the core region of Russia, right? How does it protect itself? What is the core region of China? What are its goals throughout history? What is it worried about? What is it fought for? What consistent ways has it broken apart and lost its gains? How does it tend to overextend itself? All this kind of stuff is just kind of, you know, so in the book that I've been working on for too long, one of the earliest chapters is just called, it basically says that it's called The Matrix of History. And it's basically that the idea is that geography, like the actual land, is the matrix of history. When you know what to look for, you can start to see how all of the different groups that have fought for the same regions and tried to expand and grow, it gives you a sense of the overarching patterns. And that's the broader thing is once you get that, you're like, oh, it's like, it doesn't let you even just do now. You can see, oh, well, you know, this is, you know, you can understand why did the Habsburg Empire fight the czars. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't need to know crazy economics. You don't need to know crazy stuff. It just, it lets you see these overarching patterns. Oh. It's the patterns, man. And that's the biggest thing that I was able to do kind of with this China stuff is like, there's 9 major dynasties, 12, you can go up to 12 if you want. It's thousands of years. It's too much. And if you just focus on the details, you get lost. But if you get the patterns, if you can actually rise above it a little bit, you start to see, and you actually simplify everything. So that's the key. That was the key that was for me that, lets me have confidence that, I could poke something and be like, well, that sounds good, like it could be real, but if you dig a little deeper, it's like, and you can sort of see what fits and not, but that's it. I also will say, like, it's a great exercise just to go read a bunch of American right-wing news and a bunch of American like left-wing news. Yeah. It's just like, because again, I feel like you want to be able to detach a little bit from it and see where things are going. Mm-hmm. I think we're living in kind of like a historical moment. It's like nothing's fully fleshed out in either party right now, and kind of seeing where the dual hole and where it's moving and how it's trying to affect things helps me to understand kind of where we are. It's not another way I do it.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating piece to it, is being able to, and it's a thing that I've done since this, and this is beyond the conversations that I've had with people. The mindset that this has kind of forced me into is like, let's look at all these things. And I already am curious. That's hence, the name of the show, but it helped broaden and to try to like push beyond like, all right, like let's find new things to look at. Let's find new people that have even crazier ideas and see where they fit on the spectrum, and like see how all these puzzle pieces fit together, and why this person says this and this person says this. And on the extremes, it's like, oh well, most of the time it's these people are doing this because they're getting paid to. That's really what it boils down to. But like being able to see it from all those different angles, it's super interesting to be like, oh, okay, like so you see these plays and all these just the dominoes like falling into place because of all these different perspectives.
And you also see like people's motivations and how much they know what they're talking about, right? Like you probably have people on, you're talking to them and you poke a little bit and you're like, it seems like you don't know, and you kind of lost where you're going with it. And other people are like, oh, you know your stuff, and it kind of lets you feel it out. You get a sense for what's someone just trying to make a quick buck, or someone who's trying to build this, and like where's the what's the source of the motivation. And I think that stuff's also key. You quickly get a read on people, and that helps you get a sense for what's most likely in the information too.
Yeah, that's another piece of it too, is understanding that the person you're getting your information from understands what they're talking about. It's like, all right, yeah, because sometimes, and like I most of the time don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but I like to hear about other things, and I want to hear people talk about it. But it's maybe that's what it is historically, and maybe this is a part of social media and technology as we've just grown, is we were too quick to just believe everything we see and everything, that we ingest, because we don't think about why whatever we're receiving, like why those people would have any reason to like deceive us. And we forget, like, oh, now that like the internet and advertising and all these things, like, oh, there's money behind it now. So now
it all runs on advertising.
Yeah. These people have incentive in order to get our attention, or to not necessarily lie to us, but like steer us in a certain direction. And like, it's like, oh, like before, without all this, there just wasn't that capability, particularly across nations. And it's just mind just blown. Like when you realize how deep and how entangled all these things are, it's speaking of, and it's a perfect time. What do you think about the Twitter and Elon buying this? And everyone's kind of, not everyone, but there's a lot of obviously the free speech, good, bad, I'm against it, this, that, whatever. But even more so, I thought about this with you coming on, like the implications of world, politics, like global politics, and like there's a lot of implications there with that, and like the financial districts and all these different things that I think people are like to bring up the hot button topics, like, it's free speech, or, oh yeah, it's free speech for white rich guys, or whatever, like whatever those hot things are people want to talk about. Like there's so many more implications to this thing that I just haven't seen touched on. And it, especially with the global political thing, I think that could be like, have you put much thought into that, I guess?
Yeah, well, I'm interested and curious to see what happens with Twitter. I'm not going to pass any judgments on. I think in general, the social media world needs you need new laws to regulate the playing field. I think all these companies trying to do it themselves is just not working out. But of course, we don't have a government that can put in the laws. And the second they tried to debate it, it would cause a huge thing. It would all be pulled in bias. So we're kind of stuck where the government's incompetent, and the companies have been kind of forced or taken it upon themselves to manage and regulate all this stuff. And they're not fit, and it's not their actual constitutionally. They probably shouldn't even be doing that anyway. And so then we're stuck. And then it's kind of a weird moment where, weirdly enough, the taking a company private actually gives you more freedom and to potentially make it into more of a public utility. It's a very weird thing. Public markets are dying in the United States, and people may not know, but the amount of there are more companies, on the New York Stock Exchange in 1989 than there are today. They've been leaving in droves. It's maybe like half the size, half the number of companies. It's because there's so much regulation, there's so much overhead, there's so much. You're just open to endless lawsuits that a lot of companies just aren't going public, and a lot of tech companies have been staying private. They stayed private for insane periods of time, and so that means, well, it means a lot of things. It's like, well, typically these are often very well. There's two sides, but there's the very innovative, like new tech companies that are staying private for a long time. And the historic, before they went private and then public, like Airbnb and all these, they were public, private for like a decade. It's like, that's a long time to be a startup. Yeah. And it means that people can't invest in them, right? It's only kind of rich insiders in the venture capital companies that get to invest in them, not the average person. That's a weird thing.
Right.
But then you also have a thing where a lot of the activism in finance of sort of, I think it's ESG, like environmental, social governance type stuff, where they're trying to motivate companies to have a broader perspective than pure profit, is one way to put it. And they are, it's trying to shift the incentives and the motivations and stuff. But one of the things that's happening is that companies are just going private to avoid all this, because this is all a public company thing. So all these people are pretending like, oh, the coal companies, we're just going to shut them out of everything. It's like, no, they're just getting bought and being taken private, where you have no insight, you have even less insight into what they're doing. So it's kind of, there's a weird blowback there, but it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think that we're kind of in a space where the government, like I said, can't get its act together to kind of regulate a new fair playing field for this kind of stuff, instead of using laws from the 90s that are for like telecom that doesn't make sense in the world of social media. It's like ridiculous.
Zero connection at this point in time.
It's like zero connection. The ship has sailed. And then the companies themselves are doing it's a tough position, a lot of problems. It's automated, a lot of bad stuff. So yeah, I mean, who knows? We'll really see. I'm optimistic though. I admire a lot of what Elon Musk has done. I think he's done crazy innovation. I think you don't have another tech figure who's actually done real we make things, moves civilization forward type innovation with space technologies, car technologies. I think even ironically on the left, there's no one who's done more to push forward the vision of renewable energy than Tesla, which has produced, I think, 75% of all electric cars in the United States.
Right.
It's crazy stuff. So there's a lot of ironies and weird stuff there. Yeah, he's a super capable guy, although running 3 companies at once, man, like, although I bet to him, Tesla's like, I mean, Twitter's like nothing. You know what I mean? He probably thinks it's just like,
it's just like playtime for
yeah, it's like playtime. It's like, all right, I'm going to try and, build a rocket that gets to Mars, and then I'll spend Sunday afternoon with Twitter or something.
Yeah, well, he does that. I don't know if he still does it, but was it the is it the Ridiculous Company or whatever it is, when he was like making like flamethrowers and stuff, and he was trying to talk about building tunnels under LA. Like,
oh, dude, I hope he would do that. LA's traffic is so bad.
So it's like, I just don't know. I remember I heard an interview at one point with him, and someone was like, "Man, I can't imagine what it'd be like, to be in your head." Or they were trying to get him to go into like an isolation chamber, and he was like,
Okay.
"No, I don't think I'd like that." And they're like, "Well, it's just like, he's like, yeah, my brain doesn't stop." And they're like, "I can't imagine like, what it would be like." And he was like, you don't want to. He's like, it just doesn't stop. Like, I can't do anything about it. It just goes. And it's like, I don't know what it's like to be him. You know what I mean? Maybe I hold a belief that I think he's like maybe partially like alien, like version 2.0 or something. Like,
Yeah.
like, there's something weird there with him. It's just, I guess we haven't seen a human with like his output, his volume of output in a long time. So it's like,
yeah, no, it's, I mean, yeah, what do we do? I mean, we should probably try and use someone like him to the best benefit of society. I mean, that's kind of what he's trying to do in his own way. I think that's always been my read on him. It's a weird thing too, because yeah, I mean, he wants it for glory too. He wants to accomplish all these things and get the glory, but it's like, that's always what you've done. Like, you used to have old poems like the Iliad. You're like, all right, try and become like Achilles and kill all the enemies of Sparta or whatever. It's like, right. Yeah, it's like you want to be the great guy who looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger and has women cooing after him. And it's like the same time the city wins, Right. So that's what you got to do. You got to motivate people somehow. And, riches and glory is not a bad one. Yeah, I hope he does well with that. It's very weird because like he's now that he's the richest person in the world, there's just so many layers to it now. You know what I mean? If he was like,
at least
not
on paper,
the richest person,
like
yeah, it's
paper.
True. Yeah, I know, right? Tesla. I mean, all sorts of things could definitely hit and really change all that. Yeah, well, I haven't been really focusing on it, but it's what do you think? I mean, do you think it's overall net good, bad? I don't quite know.
I think it's overall net good. Obviously everybody has their demons. I don't know what his are. I hope that we don't.
We're about to find out.
Yeah, I hope we don't find out that he has some really dark ones. That's the hope. But yeah, I don't know. If nothing else, I think possibly the shock to the system is a good thing.
Okay.
Maybe it feels like that, not like the little man won, because obviously he's like this insanely like rich, intelligent person that basically no one could ever, strive to be, because good luck. But like, it's like that when that thing happens that you don't expect it to happen. And it's like, oh, this necessarily isn't an absolute bad thing. Hopefully it's a good thing. Like, but it's going to be interesting. That's for sure.
It's definitely going to be interesting.
So like it gives a little hope that it's not the same droning, bullshit over and over again. But like I said, we'll see.
This is also a guy who he tweets images of Bill Gates like pregnant as a meme.
Yeah. See, I think we need a little more comedy in our life. And
I agree. But it's weird. A lot of people wish he had like some sort of more like rich man's dignity. It's very weird. They're like, I wish the richest man in the world had more like dignity. It's like, what, do you want him to be like a politician or something? Like,
you want him to be a prick?
It's interesting.
Like, I'm glad I guess if nothing else.
Also, the guy needs fun.
He's having fun.
He works
exactly.
He works kind of all the time. Is the sense? It's like, I mean, you can't. He has two extremely hard jobs, right?
Yeah, trying to go to Mars and creating, electric vehicles that are
self-driving electric vehicles. Yeah, that like. Also and robots now. Did you hear about? Yeah, he's doing robots.
Oh, I believe it. Especially with his Neuralink, freaks me the hell out.
He says
have you ever seen the video with the monkey playing Pong?
No, I saw the headline.
Oh, there's a video. We've shown it on the show. It was probably a year ago or so now. But like, there's a monkey that playing Pong with Neuralink, all strapped into its brain, and that's it. It's just watching the screen. It's controlling the screen with its brain. Like, it started out with a joystick, cool. And then like they slowly integrated it, and then they took the joystick away, and it was playing Pong against a computer with its brain. That was it. So like that was a while ago. So like,
what do you think about the like the metaverse type stuff where you're going to have like an augmented reality thing.
I think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Sure. Especially here. Like we've talked about commerce, like we are consumers. We are, I mean, I don't mean to be a jerk, but like if there could be a general view of the United States across the world, I bet a lot of them are like, they're just a bunch of fat, lazy people that watch TV all day. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I get why people have that view because it's like, there's so much of just, we have so much free time. Like, that's awesome. That's a good thing. But like, I mean, I don't see how like virtual reality. I mean, it's been, have you ever tried any of the headsets or anything like that?
Yeah, I've used, I mean, they're still like kind of clunky. You know what I mean? Like they're too big. Like once they're like sunglasses or just like glasses, that's a different game.
Or
like,
once they plug right into your brain with Neuralink.
Yeah, probably get the glasses first, right? I mean,
yeah,
who knows?
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it'll take a while. No, definitely.
Is that down the road? You know
I mean, it's funny. I've recently been. I went on this 2-week trip. I went to Arizona and I was in New Mexico and actually Texas. I was camping. I haven't done this much camping in a long time. I remember like I was, my friend is a friend of mine. He came down from Alaska and he, he's really good at like identifying plants and stuff. Like I can't identify a thing. But we were doing all this stuff. We were hiking and stuff, and I was starting to learn. And I was like, "Oh, this is really cool!" Like I was like learning it. And then at night, another friend of mine actually gave me a telescope a while ago, and so I brought this telescope, and I was like, "Holy shit, that's the moon!" Like, and you can see the stars everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was really crazy, and all this nature stuff, and it made me realize it's like I need a bit more of that in my life because I realized I stare at screens like all the time. Yeah. So, but in a world where we all just stare at screens, it's like, why not just bring the screen right to our eyes? And then from there, just in our brain. Yep. Like it's almost like a bizarrely natural progression. Although I now feel like I'll leave that to the younglings while I will be out in nature or something.
Yeah, I think that's something that our next generations are going to have to deal with or reconcile or whatever. It's I think within the next, I would say within our grandkids, that those the next 100 years, I think there's going to be an option of just plugging into whatever, whether it be, you look at, we're already kind of tied. We're already kind of connected to the internet through our phones in this country, because most places you have cell service and whatnot. But the next step is just to plug it in your brain. So you don't have to, you just don't have to pull the phone out. You just think of it. And there's some kind of, computer symbiosis that goes on there that we become augmented humans. Like,
yeah, I'm really curious where this goes. Like they don't have much runway right now. Like as things kind of break down the rest of the world, like you're going to have to start making sure you have a profit from this stuff. Like I saw that Facebook lost like 10 billion investing in the metaverse stuff this year. It wants to keep that up because it now knows, TikTok's eating our lunch or whatever there. No one's using Facebook anymore except old people.
Yeah.
Like we need something new. So we'll see, but you got to also get people to buy it. It's got to be cheap. What do you do if you can't build it in China? It's like, we might be at a phase where the consumer electronic boom since like 2000, even earlier, last 40 years, it might be slowing down for the first time.
Yeah. Or at least maybe taking a little break for a little bit until somebody somewhere finds something that really, ignites it and boosts it for the next couple of years. Because
until Elon starts another company.
Yeah.
And just
yeah. Well, I think partly you said like the meta thing, like, well, like I think they got ahead of themselves because the equipment, it's not there yet. You know what I mean? The experience is not like, for something like that, you can't just like throw it on your TV or, put like, you really need some kind of really submersive technology. And I think their money probably would have been better spent. I mean, I'm not saying I know better than the entire group of Facebook, but maybe their money would have been better spent like investing in the technology.
Video games, dude. It's just going to be like, it's going to start with the video games. You know what I mean? Like, that's what people will buy right away.
The money's there. So why not increase the submersivity? That's not a word at all. Whatever. You know what I mean? But like, why not increase? Yeah. The immersive experience.
Yeah.
With video games. Put the money into that. So then you can develop the technology to do something else with it.
I think you said it best, dude. They probably just got ahead of themselves. They're just like, we want it all. Like Russia. They're like, we want it all. It's like, well, can you can you eat that? Can you fit it in your mouth? Or is it like,
yeah, can you fit that in your mouth?
Can you actually fit it in your mouth, or are you gonna have to spit it out and take a smaller bite?
Yeah. Shit.
Oh man.
On that note, I have well, one more big question for you, and then some follow-ups real quick.
Sure.
So I mentioned to you how we had the conversation on another show earlier that about the the gold and the James Webb telescope. And I had during that conversation talked about how it kind of may tie into megalithic structures and all these different things around the world and the different time periods of technology. Is there anything, because I've heard a lot of this is just a personal like fun thing for me, but like looking into like the pyramids of Egypt, or the pyramids around the world really in all these different places. I saw the History Channel did something about possible pyramids in Antarctica, and that they had found core samples that like organic matter had been growing there. I think it was like less than I want to say it was like 8,000 years ago or something like that, they think. So how all these things line up. Is there any type of like, vast like megalithic structures that kind of tie into these weird unexplainable things in like that Eastern Asia like district? Because obviously we have like the Great Wall and those things, but like, I don't know. Is there anything like, do they try to keep any of those kind of things like out of the public view? Or because I saw something, maybe I'll end this here, but I saw something that was reported to be in Japan of like these big stones that were cut that were just like, you look at them, it's like, how did they do that? Because that just seems nearly impossible. And I don't think I've ever really seen a whole lot of that come out of China. And is that part of like just their history, or that they don't have anything like that? Or is it just that they kind of keep those things quiet?
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff in parts of China that were, well, like everything in Chinese history is subordinated to this idea that there's one main line of China, and it all sprung from the same well. But there are actually like many different pieces. So a lot of other people's history, other regions' history in China gets shut down. Nope, sorry. And then everything else is kind of reconfigured to be part of this. So they have like really old fossils of like basically it's a type of human that might be like not us, but it's really old in China. They want people to think that maybe China had its own like type of human. This again, it's all like kind of like it's like suggestive. We're not really saying this, and like I usually don't find most of this stuff worth reading because it's so, again, it's like that my red flag thing comes up where I'm like, this sounds too much like other things I've heard from you guys. There's that. A lot of the region in China is like the old, most habitable region. They're extremely like erosive. So like it's like wind sweat, like things get blown away. It's like not good material to build strong, sturdy type, pyramid stuff in. There's not a lot of that in the old regions that they first kind of did. A lot of the main northern China region was like a swamp basically when they first got there. So there's not like super old stuff. I'm not the best on this. In general, I try to stick to like this, like, what we could say potentially this round of human civilization. You know what I mean? So like the last 12,000 years. I'm not trying to go too far back. Although I am familiar. What's that geologist guy? Big beard. Beard. Randall Carlson. Yeah. So I'm familiar with a lot of the stuff he's talking about. And my general thought is, it's good to learn like the stuff about the current round of civilization, but also, I don't know. I don't like things that close off the imagination. You know what I mean? I don't like it. It's like, oh, we have this like, especially, anthropology departments, things like this. It's like, I wouldn't say they're the most expansive visionary places right now. Right. So, that's good. But I don't know. I also don't dive too much, into it. I've also just, Yeah, no, but I mean, so I would say in East Asia, I wouldn't say I know that much about it. There's probably people who've kind of focused and looked a bit more, but yeah, most of the stuff is like tying everything to the one China, stomping out places like Sichuan, this other region in China. It's history, and it's not that old. To be honest, it's not pyramidal, this
Right.
stuff. Like, it's not impressive like pyramidal.
So I wonder if how much of that has gone over like through time that's happened over and over and over. You know, they always say like the history is written by the victors. So it's like I could see that just being, you know, some of those things just being erased. You know, and I guess
even more.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, just kind of on that point, like when I mean this place is like erosive is probably not the best word. There's a city in China called Kaifeng. Doesn't matter anything about the name. It used to be an ancient capital about 1,000 years ago. And they've done fossil studies, and they've kind of like dug under Kaifeng, and they've done kind of seen, you know, like how far deep, how, you know, what do we find? We pull stuff out. And they've gone under, they found something very weird. They found basically 6 fossilized versions of Kaifeng under the current one. Because what happened is you had these crazy floods, and you had this super filled with sediment, and basically they just get washed under the sands. And it's happened just in recent history like 6 times. Wow. So again, this isn't a place that's like, again, it's chaotic, man. It's like things aren't lasting for thousands of years here typically in that way. And honestly, China would love to have some mega pyramids. It would be freaking out. If it had pyramids, you know, everybody would know that China had pyramids.
It's a national history kind of piece.
No, dude, they would be like, look how glorious we are. We're better than Egypt. Stupid Egyptians. Little did they know that China existed, and we were so much more glorious. Like,
I guess that makes sense.
That's their game. That. Oh yeah, dude. There's no. They would not be hiding it. They would also rope it in, unless it was like if it was in the area where it'd probably be. They're all for it. They would be all for it, and it wouldn't be in most likely in the other places. So I'd say, unfortunately, not that I know of. Possible. Oh, it's always possible, but
that's interesting. I wonder what could have been there before. Yeah, it's just a little like, just pet like joy of mine is thinking about is the, you know, what could have been here, because I've seen some evidence where it's like this is a lot of coincidental like events and things that are taught like all kind of match up, where it's like this could have been fascinating. Like what was here before us? Like some of these things are just unexplainable and all, and it's fun. But also at the same time, it kind of, I don't know, it kind of, I take this approach to life where it's the more insignificant I feel, the more I feel like I can make my life worth something.
Huh.
It's like when you look at space, like space doesn't, like the universe doesn't care. This infinite universe does not care one iota about me whatsoever. So then that means I can live the life that I want, because it technically doesn't matter in a sense. You know, that's a condensed version. But that's why I kind of think about like ancient civilizations, like what has our human race done in the past and what can we do in the future? It's just fascinating. But you mentioned, you know, like China's history, and obviously we've talked about this all the times, but is there anything that like would be a good recommendation for anybody that's like, hey, I want to learn more about this, but I don't quite have your fortitude to really to dig in. Like, is there like documentaries or books or like, you know, YouTube channels or any like shows or anything like that you'd be like, hey, this is a really good, like, especially like with their older history and, you know, understanding how and what, you know, is really China.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a good sort of geopolitics in general YouTube channel. It's called Caspian Report. It's pretty good. It's just like a guy in Azerbaijan. He does a lot of graphics heavy videos, and there's some China stuff there. Can't vouch for all of it, but in general, he's pretty good. Unfortunately, a lot of the books on China, man, are like brutal. They get basically they don't reach the level of the patterns, and they get lost in the details, and it's excruciating to read. Like that's the unfortunate thing. I think honestly, if you found a book that said the geography of China, anything related to the geography of China, there's probably parts in that are very good, give you a sense of things. Check out my podcast. It's not kind of the best way to learn about things because it's kind of topical about what right now. Ideally, I would tell people just check out my book. That would be the way to, because I'm trying to make it like an accessible, general book that's like, it goes in depth, but it's like not at some brutal level, and it's relating it back. Even though it goes all the way back, it's relating it to the modern day as you go the whole time. That's kind of the goal, and it's a difficult thing. That's probably why it's taking me a bit longer. But
When's it coming out?
Should be by the end of the year.
Awesome.
End of the year. I need that. I need this bad boy done. Yeah, no, so it's good. I'm actually filled. I can actually show people. I have just like endless. It's just all of these like fragments of pages and things. Like it's just like
just trying to put
it's
it all
all
together.
I actually had to buy. I found a printer because I realized like I need to read it. I can't just be on the screen. So I have to have that picture. So I am all around you is just papers everywhere. So it's in the works. But yeah, honestly, I there's deep problems with kind of trying to learn about China, and I learned this firsthand that the way that the Chinese describe their history is not helpful. It's obscuring a lot of things. It's trying to make themselves feel good about things, trying to encourage their people in certain ways. The West bought into a lot of stuff that kind of makes it difficult. There's all the stuff about Confucius that just makes it more confusing.
It's funny how that works, huh?
Yeah, it's not great. So I'll definitely try and think of some more. Yeah, I mean, I think that's good in general. I mean, just Chinese books in general. I've read dozens, but I don't finish all of them because it's just like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's
unfortunate.
Yeah. I guess going back to, I think what you're doing and, the information and like I said, what I've gathered from you and the conversations we had have just been phenomenal. And it's one of those big pieces that it really does affect us, but most people never think about it and they don't understand how eventually these pieces fall into place that, even at a selfish level, maybe it's a good idea to try to understand some of these things so you can understand how this whole machine is working and, affecting our lives. And I think you do a great job at it. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. There's, look, one of the things that I've been really trying to do, I kind of refashioned Chinese history to give you like people a big pattern. Like it's too much. The truth about China is too much, but that's just the honest truth. Like, and if I recommended some book, people would get like halfway through a chapter or two and they'd be like, dude, I'm done. Like this is, it's just too much. It's too much. You drown. But there's a story, kind of an archetypal scenario in Chinese history, a legend that you can use to kind of understand the whole. There's kind of two images of the whole that have been produced in Chinese history. One comes from something called the Book of Changes. Have you ever heard of this?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. So this is really cool. There's a more familiar book called the Tao Te Ching, which is basically the way of change. It's by like Lao Tzu, and it's just like it's a book. It's very cool. It's very enigmatic and stuff. But there's another book, hundreds of years older. It's called the Book of Changes. It's probably the most mysterious and enigmatic book in all of world literature. It's basically a book of divination, and it's quite fascinating. Basically, you can basically ask this book questions, and it provides you answers about these questions, and it does spooky things, right? There's like that's kind of the way to describe it. I don't need to get too much into it, but it's very cool. And there's a bizarre fact where this book, it can explain a lot about China. It's a very weird thing. This is too much. Not gonna get into that. But there's another image of the whole, which is really cool, and it's about this archetypal story of basically China's first emperor. And in his saga, you can learn everything about China. You can learn all of its ups and downs and histories. And so I've refashioned things to make China accessible and then to describe it on the ground, practically, geographically. Where's this? Where are the choke points? Where are the passes? What's this? What's happened? Where's the population? Who got crushed? Whose language won? That's the way. And then you have the deeper narrative to give you a sense of the patterns. And that is what I always found lacking and everything about China. And this is also the thing that lets you like grab like the core, like the essence, the treasure, whatever that's kind of embedded in this civilization, and learn something powerful from it, because things are going to south in China very soon, and it's just going to end up in chaos again, and no one's going to understand what's happened. But the fact of what it's done and its whole history, and then kind of what it managed to accomplish the last 50 years, it's crazy. It's like a ridiculous thing. It's a ridiculous story. And you don't want it to just submerge under the waters again, right? I think there's something really powerful to learn from it. And so that's kind of why I put a lot of time. And then the best part is it reflects on us. it teaches you like, well, why are we, why are we different? Why are we better? Why are we worse? How can we be better? And then, it help us move forward. I think you nailed it earlier, man, when you were saying, once you realize kind of like we're it, like not just the United States, but like, there's space is kind of empty as far as we can tell. And even the past, man, like I love civilizations. I actually have a funny story. I was in Heraklion, which is a city in Crete a while ago and last year. And I was in a museum and I was walking through this museum. I was walking really slowly and reading everything. And this girl was like walking at the same pace as me through this museum. And so I was like, after like multiple rooms of me being right next to her reading something, I was like, I should make conversation and say hello. Anyway, we started talking afterwards and she was just kind of floating through the city. And afterwards, she's like, we were just talking, at the end of this place and when it shut down. And she's like, wow, you really like civilization, don't you? It was like it's a really funny thing. And I think about that now, like, yeah, I think I really do. And anyway, that's where, where we are. Like civilization is got us here. And we're kind of the light in the darkness here, the tip of the spear. Like there's whatever happens is what we make it, right? Like the past has, like the thing I don't like about the people who look too far into the past and imagine too much of the ancient civilization stuff. It's like, I feel like the real potential is now. I don't I want people to know that the moment to do something remarkable is now. It wasn't like in a past time that was greater than now. It's like, no, we went to the moon. I don't think anybody else went to the moon. Maybe. I mean, could have, but like,
I guess I look at it as like this is a potential of like, hey, maybe we have more potential than someone in the past. Like maybe we've gotten this far in the past or similar, some kind of whatever. But how do we learn from the mistakes and how do we go beyond what we've ever gone beyond before? In a sense,
it's it reminds me of something someone told me. This a friend's girlfriend saw something on Instagram of hers where she was going to a seance. I don't know if you heard of this stuff where like some guy was like going to basically, I don't know, kind of tell them what spirits or dead people that she knew were talking about or saying. Right. Okay. We got this whole conversation and someone else said something really interesting where this guy was like, you know what? Oh, everyone's so focused on the dead. It's like, maybe this is like, you're in a basketball game and you're the player on the court, and you're shooting a free throw. And listening to the dead is like trying to listen to what some audience member is saying, while you're the one on the court. It's your moment. You're the living one, and all the dead people are like behind you, trying to push you forward. And I just thought that was kind of mind blowing. I was like, huh. It's almost like a dream. Like I remember I used to think about dreams a lot, and now I don't think about. Although I like having a nice dream. That's kind of cool. But like, I used to think about them a lot more. And now you kind of realize, like, when you're really kind of like doing the things you want to do or trying to get these things done, it's like, oh, like the dreams are just like juggling information, sometimes a lot of it's weird, but I just love that image of like, you're, the living people trying to make the moment, shoot the shot on the court, and really the dead, they're probably just more in the audience, man. And that's kind of what I feel like. Even if they did crazy things, it's like, I don't know, the moment is now. So I'm always trying to get people to like feel that energy of what's possible. Like what you're doing with the show, like get that spark of curiosity and people start really moving with, energies. It's amazing to see.
Yeah, I think I can't, disagree with that at all as living in the moment and realizing like, hey, like we're here, whatever it is, whether it's creation or evolution or simulation or
I love how there's 3 now.
Yeah. I mean, whatever I hate that's, or, maybe I also heard this one and I kind of keep this in the bucket. Maybe we're just on, intergalactic travel and we're just dreaming. And maybe this is like some kind of simulation not necessarily in a simulation, but like just as like a job interview for what we're going to do when we get to our new planet. And I'm like, ooh, I like that one too. Like, why not? I don't know. Okay. But either way, this is what it is. And I can't change it right now. So I'm going to enjoy it while I can. Like,
yeah. And we're living in the lightning, man. Times are now
moving.
Active. Yeah, moving.
Moving. Yeah, fast. Oh, well, I can't think of any better way to end this, Jason. I appreciate this opportunity. As always, it's been enlightening and fantastic talking to you.
Yeah, it was great.
So hopefully
it was great.
Hopefully there's not nearly as much stuff that's happened. I didn't even get to multiple things that I was thinking about asking you, but I think we're almost 3.5 hours into it now. So till next time, hopefully there's nothing crazy that continues to happen, but you're not making me feel necessarily very good on that front. So
well, at least this time you won't be spooked if crazy things start happening right afterwards.
Yeah,
you'll feel like, well,
that's how it goes.
Seems like par for the course. Famine and energy shortages and conflicts and this and that. I mean, it's horrific, but I like how we also ended on an optimistic note. that was good.
Yeah.
Like it's tougher these days to do that. So
yeah,
it's good. And it's so true, man. I'm blown away. I think we both also really love maybe we feel something very similar about when you look at things that are trying to see space and James Webb gold-plated telescopes. There's something about it too. You really, whenever space is involved, you really get a sense of how vast it all is, right? And how small we are, but like we're also like the one microbe that we know of that's like wiggling around.
Right. Intentionally.
Yeah, intentionally. Like, I'm trying to move.
Yeah.
Like a millimeter. Like, it took me 5,000 years.
But we did it.
We did it. Exactly.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great. Well, until next time.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us today. Remember, check out the website chronic-curiosity.com to join us at the forum, have some fun, interaction, pick you up a comfy t-shirt, or if you just want to support the show and donate, all that is on the website as well. Thank you. Until next time. See you.